There are countless doors all over the world that haven't been opened for decades, and even centuries. The question is why? It seems that nowadays you can open any door you want. The truth is that some doors were sealed for a grave reason. And so far, nobody has found out what treasures and mysteries they hide. Here are 4 doors that keep their secrets all too well. The Taj Mahal. First up, we've got the Taj Mahal in India, one of the most romantic places in the world. Shah Jahan commissioned it in 1631 and dedicated it to his 3rd wife, who he loved like crazy. They were married for 19 years and had a whopping 14 kids together. But unfortunately, she passed away while giving birth to their last baby. Shah Jahan was heartbroken and decided to build an epic tomb to remember her by. The construction took a whopping 20 years to finish. The building has quite an interesting layout. The design is super unusual with these 4 massive 130-foot tall minarets that stand on the corners of a huge platform. They're not just there for looks. Back in the 17th century, architects were having some serious issues with buildings collapsing under their own weight. So, the chief architect of the Taj Mahal made sure to place those minarets as far away from the tomb as possible. And he even tilted them in a way so that if they did fall, they wouldn't wreck the rest of the Taj Mahal. Talk about planning ahead. The Taj Mahal is hiding some crazy secrets. There are sealed rooms all over the place that nobody is allowed to enter. And if you check out photos of the building from the riverside, you can spot 2 basements. But guess what? They're sealed up too. Nobody knows what's inside or why they've been locked up since the time of Shah Jahan. Apparently, there's a good reason why those rooms are off limits. Some researchers think that they were built using marble, which turns into a different substance called calcium carbonate if it's exposed to carbon dioxide. And when that happens, little bits of marble start chipping off like crazy. To make matters worse, there's no air flowing into these rooms. That means that if too much CO2 builds up in the basement, the 4 minarets could collapse. But wait, there's more. Some people think that the body of Shah Jahan's wife can be found in one of these sealed-up rooms in pristine condition. Why not? Who knows what the mysterious rooms might keep? The Great Sphinx of Giza. The Great Sphinx of Giza is shrouded in mystery. It's not just the largest monolith statue in the world, but it's also a hybrid creature with a woman's head and a lion's body that originates from Egyptian and Greek mythology. It's also very ancient. It's estimated to be around 4,500 years old. The construction of this marvel took about 3 years and required 100 workers who were not slaves and were treated with delicacies like sheep and goat meat. It is also thought that it used to be much more massive than it is now. Archaeologists found huge stone blocks and abandoned toolkits near the site. However, the real secrets of the Sphinx lie underground, near its paws. A group of scientists used a seismograph to detect 2 hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx's paws. Some people think that these rooms might be the legendary Hall of Records, which holds ancient scrolls revealing the secrets of the universe. I mean, that's way cooler than any library I've ever been to. Rumor has it that the Egyptians even had info on Atlantis stashed down there, which is like a super old version of a conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, we can't go on an adventure to check it out just yet. The chambers presumably have 2 entrances, but both remain sealed. The researchers haven't yet received the green light to check out their theory. Let's hope they won't keep us in suspense forever. Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple. This temple is located in the beautiful state of Kerala in India. This temple is famous for more than just its breathtaking beauty. Underneath the temple there are 6 vaults, creatively named A, B, C, D, E, and F. The enormous iron doors to these chambers add to the mystery of what's behind them. A few years back, the authorities decided to open these vaults to the world, but it wasn't an easy task. You can't just open the doors and enter the vaults. It required a lot of work. It took them a while, but finally, in 2011, they opened 5 of the 6 chambers. And guess what they found? Tons of treasure. Bags of gold, precious gemstones, and priceless diamond jewelry. The estimated worth of everything found in the vaults is a whopping $1 trillion. It's like the temple was the real-life inspiration for Aladdin's Cave of Wonders. But wait, I said 5 of the 6. What happened to the last one? Vault B has remained closed, but not for lack of trying. They simply didn't manage to open it. There is even a belief that it's fatally cursed. Legend says that only a saint or sage can break the curse by chanting a specific mantra. But no one has been able to do this yet, presumably because we don't have saints or sages at our disposal. There is also rumor that in the 30s some temple invaders tried to enter Vault B to do some good old looting. But they never reached their target. Apparently terrible snakes materialized out of nowhere and chased the gang away. But of course, this is just an urban legend, and there is not proof of that. However, it is said that the Auditor General dealing with the temple claimed that Vault B had been opened at least 7 times since 1990, and nothing bad happened to anyone who entered. Who knows? Maybe we should send Indiana Jones to check it out. The First Emperor's Tomb. Deep under a hill, completely undisturbed and surrounded by dangerous traps, lies an ancient 2,000-year-old tomb. It belongs to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He was born in the Qin state and became king when he was just a boy. But when he grew up and gained full power, he united the warring states ancient China was divided into by conquering them. After that, he created the Qin dynasty. When he died in 210 BCE, they buried him deep underground in a massive tomb. And when I say massive, I mean massive! Back in 1974, some farmers in Xi'an, China, stumbled upon something strange while digging a well, a huge terracotta soldier. This discovery led to an extensive archaeological dig that has continued for over 40 years, revealing a collection of thousands of clay soldiers. The unique thing about these soldiers is that each one has its own unique features, from hairstyles to facial expressions. It's believed that there could be up to 8,000 of these soldiers, but only 2,000 have been found so far. Interestingly, the central tomb, which is believed to be the resting place of the emperor, is still untouched. In ancient records, there are references to a vast underground city that the emperor built, complete with scenic towers, palaces, and whatnot. Sima Qian, a Han Dynasty historian, wrote that the tomb was adorned with treasures and had space for hundreds of officials, but the lack of technology to properly examine the site is what's holding things up. Qin Shi Huang was surrounded by liquid mercury in his tomb, with 2 of the streams representing the major rivers of China, Yellow River and Yangtze. The ancient Chinese believed that mercury could provide immortality, but it could have also caused the emperor's death since he regularly took mercury pills to prolong his life. The dangerous levels of mercury contamination in the soil near the tomb are the main reason why scientists are reluctant to explore it. It could be very dangerous both for people and for the environment. Now, if I had to choose which door to open, I'd probably go for the one that doesn't lead to a tomb surrounded by poisonous mercury. Call me crazy, but I'd like to avoid any potential health hazards.
One of the most unexplored and mysterious places on Earth is located in plain sight. It's one of the most majestic monuments of humankind. The wonder of the ancient world hides a secret that scientists and archaeologists still can't solve. This is the Great Sphinx of Giza in Egypt. The huge sculpture of a lion with a human head was carved out of rock about 4,500 years ago. Scientists still don't know the exact date of its creation and are also unaware of who built it and what for. There are many assumptions and theories, but none of them has been confirmed. Most people have seen this majestic sculpture either in photographs or in reality, but almost no one knows what's hidden underneath it. The statue of the Sphinx was carved from a single piece of limestone. It was painted. The remains of color pigment on the surface prove this. In the distant past, the Sphinx looked much brighter and more colorful than what we see now. But even after thousands of years, its greatness hasn't diminished. And by the way, Sphinx is not the real name. It was invented by the Greeks about 100 years or more after its creation. Initially, the Egyptians called the statue Hor-em-Akhet. There are many legends and theories saying the Sphinx is there for a reason. It's like a watchdog that guards the tomb of the pharaoh and the secrets of ancient Egypt. These legends become more plausible when archaeologists discovered hidden entrances at the feet of the Sphinx. They believe that these secret passages are the beginning of the tunnels leading to the halls with treasures. You can find a lot of stories on the internet that claim the Sphinx hides the Hall of Records, a repository filled with ancient and secret knowledge. One of the main artifacts of this repository is supposed to be the records of the ancient mythical state of Atlantis. According to legends, the entire library from this city was moved under the Sphinx. The entrance to this library must be located next to the Sphinx's right paw. Many archaeologists tried to find this entrance, but came away empty-handed. Also, there are many images with detailed diagrams of the underground city that consists of a network of tunnels and chambers under the Sphinx. Someone says there are structures as tall as 12-story buildings hiding underground, but there's no evidence of this. Archaeologists, even after millennia, continue to explore the mysterious sculpture. At the same time, many Egyptians don't want to learn more about the Sphinx. They're terrified of awakening something supernatural. In 1998, scientists discovered tunnels leading to empty caves under the Sphinx. They found evidence of earlier excavations there. It's quite possible that someone managed to find the treasures and take them away. Some people believe Egyptians found some kind of artifact under the Sphinx that has the power of unknown advanced technologies. The artifact is so powerful that it can change the course of history. Of course, most theories are just fairy tales of conspiracy fans, but it's a confirmed fact that the Sphinx hides a system of caves and rooms. There are so many rumors surrounding the Sphinx that it's impossible to understand what's true and what's false. In any case, it's difficult and dangerous to study the sculpture because active excavations can destroy it. And then the entrance to the underground rooms can get blocked by rocks and lost forever. Also, further exploration requires a lot of money, and financing is not always easy to find. But the main reason? It's too risky. There's no guarantee that people will be able to get out of the underground labyrinths. For these reasons, scientists and archaeologists have been exploring this majestic structure for so long. Another famous architectural monument with a secret is Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Everyone admires the images of the U.S. presidents' faces carved into the rock, but few people know that there's a secret room hidden behind the head of Abraham Lincoln. The architect of Mount Rushmore wanted to carve slabs on the rock with the record of the main stages of the country's history. But his plan was too complicated to carry out. Then he was offered to implement it on a much smaller scale, to build a secret room inside the mountain. The idea was to save this knowledge so that future generations will always remember the history of their country. Unfortunately, the architect didn't have time to finish his work. The construction stopped for several decades. But in the late 90s, the project was resumed. Porcelain enamel panels depicting the history of the U.S. were placed in the room. It's possible that these plates will be stored there forever. But people can't see them, at least for now. The room is inaccessible to tourists as it's too difficult to get inside. Another secret room is located in the Empire State Building. More precisely, it's not even a room, but a place where you can take cool photos. Almost all tourists gather on the observation deck of the 86th floor to enjoy a stunning view of Manhattan. But there's another deck with panoramic windows on the 102nd floor. There are way fewer people there because almost no one knows about that place. Fortunately, access to this deck is open to everyone. You probably won't have to wait in line for a long time to take a photo. You'll feel special because you're in such a secret place where there are almost no people. But the coolest place is even higher, on the 103rd floor. This is a spacious observation deck where celebrities get their photographs taken. It's not a public place, but if you know the right people, you can get there. There are almost no security measures on the site. Only a low ledge between you and an abyss. That's why crowds of people are forbidden from coming here. It's not so easy to get there. and you're unlikely to succeed without a guide. First, you need to choose the right elevator that will take you there. Then you'll go through several engineering rooms filled with pipes, electrical panels, and other technical stuff. The final part of your way is a set of stairs inside a tiny corridor. And here you are, at the top of New York. Now we're in Paris. See the Eiffel Tower? Inside it, there are restaurants and observation decks. But if you try hard, you can find a secret apartment. Now it's a museum, but it was built so that people could live in it. The architect of the tower, Gustav Eiffel, created this apartment in 1889 for himself. It's almost at the very top of the Eiffel Tower. Imagine what a beautiful view he observed every day. He was the first and only tenant. No one else could gain access to this place. When the architect passed away, the apartment remained empty for a long time. Only recently, they restored it and turned it into a museum. Inside, the epoch of the last century is recreated. They even put wax figures of Gustav Eiffel, his daughter, and the American inventor Thomas Edison inside the room. This place is filled with an endless stream of passengers, office workers running late, visitors from other cities, noise, and train whistles. At Grand Central Station in New York, among all these sounds, you can hear the sound of a ball hitting a racket, if you're in the right place. A real tennis court is hidden inside New York Central Station. It belongs to a tennis club that arranges corporate games for employees of many companies. The club was opened in the 60s. Now we're moving to London, Charing Cross Road. It isn't easy to find one secret place here. To do this, you need to look carefully at your feet. Do you see these sewer grates in the asphalt? Inside them, you can notice two signs with the name Little Compton Street. Yeah, there's another street right below you. It disappeared from all maps at the end of the 19th century. Charing Cross Road was built over it. The identification signs that you see are part of old engineering tunnels. There's another interesting place in London. It's located in the southeast corner of Trafalgar Square. At first glance, it looks like a thick lamppost, but there are too many tourists walking around. You come closer and realize that one person can easily fit inside the post. The lamppost belongs not to an electrician, but to a police officer. Yeah, this is the smallest police station in the world. It was built in the 1930s and used as a watch post. Officers had to sit there one by one and watch Trafalgar Square. That always attracted a lot of pickpockets and all kinds of other criminals.
2 centuries ago, a 31-year-old Frenchman stormed into his brother's office in Paris. He had only one thing to share. "I've got it!" The man was so excited that he immediately collapsed. He spent the next 5 days in bed recovering his health. Who was this mysterious person, and why was he so thrilled? Jean-François Champollion made one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history. He had cracked the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This enabled scientists to finally unravel the secrets of this ancient civilization. They weren't able to read hieroglyphs for nearly 2,000 years. After the Romans took over Egypt, the intricate writing system slowly faded away from people's minds. The last of the hieroglyphic texts date back to the 4th century. For thousands of years, Egyptians used images to show their lives. But the knowledge of how to read these pictures was lost to modern science. The story of hieroglyphs began in 3250 before current era. That's when ancient Egyptians developed writing. Their motivation was to better organize the distribution and storage of goods. One of the earliest examples is a ceramic jar that had an inscription in black ink. There were 2 major writing systems. The first were the hieroglyphs, which literally means sacred carving. Egyptians carved hieroglyphs in stone on temples, tombs, and similar monuments for 3,000 years. They present a system of pictorial texts. A pictograph is a picture or a drawing that stands for an idea of a word. It's a precursor to the true writing as we have it today. For example, when Egyptians wanted to write ibis, they would draw a small image of the bird. Hieroglyphs can be found on walls. They were a formal way of writing. The other writing system was hieratic. Egyptians mostly used it when writing on papyrus. That's an early, thicker form of the paper we have today. It soon evolved into demotic. This improved version became the most common writing systems in ancient Egypt. Then, in the early 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great took control of Egypt. This was the time when the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty ruled the country. You've probably heard of the last ruler of this dynasty, Cleopatra. During her time, Egyptian Demotic and Greek were used side by side. The two started mixing, and by the year 100, a new language emerged, Coptic. It slowly replaced the ancient writing system. Only Egyptian priests used hieroglyphs for the next couple of centuries, and then their meaning was lost to history. But not forever. Arabs were the first who tried to solve the mystery of the hieroglyphs. Medieval travelers came across these strange symbols and wanted to understand their meaning. They consulted speakers of Coptic and translated text from Greek and Latin into Arabic to break the code of the hieroglyphs. During the Renaissance, Europeans also became fascinated with the legacy of ancient Egypt. Scholars from the Old Continent believed that hieroglyphs were a group of symbols as opposed to a written language. This was all about to change in 1799. A year earlier, Napoleon, the famous French ruler, arrived in Egypt. His subordinates constructed a fort that dated back to the 15th century. Rashid, or Rosetta, was a port town in the northeast of Egypt, near Alexandria. One section of the old fortification wall contained an interesting slab inside. The stone tablet was made of a granite-like rock. It was just 40 inches high and 30 inches wide. It contained 3 distinctive sections of text carved into it. The letters were in 3 scripts and 2 languages: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. It was a fragment of a larger ancient stela. These are upright stone slabs that are used to dedicate to a person or an event, but the one from Rosetta was damaged. 2/3 of the hieroglyphic text on the top was missing. The bottom Greek text lacked a cornerstone. The only fully preserved section was the writing in Demotic in the middle of the slab. It eventually ended up in the British Museum. The scientific community was intrigued, and the race was on to decipher it. Prints and casts of the slab went out all over Europe. Scholars already knew ancient Greek, so in theory, this shouldn't have been so hard. The first people who saw the Rosetta Stone thought the process would take 2 weeks. In the end, it took 2 decades. The main issue was the fact that hieroglyphs and spoken ancient Egyptian didn't have a connection anymore. Scientists didn't know what sounds the letters on the slab corresponded to. Imagine if English disappeared 1,000 years in the future. Then someone finds a tablet with the word dog. At first, they wouldn't know how to read the word or the individual letters. Even if they figured out how to pronounce the word, they wouldn't know its meaning. This is what linguists were dealing with in the case of the Rosetta Stone. The careful study of the artifact produced another find. The texts weren't direct translations of each other. They both described the same event, but in different words. It was like you saw a movie with 2 friends, and then all 3 of you wrote different reviews about it. The original text was probably in Greek, but the translators added extra words to make it sound more Egyptian. An English physician and physicist, Thomas Young, made the first great breakthrough. He knew that the name Ptolemy appeared several times in the text based on the Greek translation. This wasn't an Egyptian name, so it was impossible to represent it with a single image. The only way to spell out this Greek name was to use symbols that sound like it when produced. This is called transliteration, and we have it today as well. This is how foreign-sounding words are written down in Chinese or some Slavic languages. Young focused on sets of hieroglyphs in oval frames. These are called cartouches. He experimented a bit but finally discovered that one of them read, Ptolemy the Great. The individual hieroglyphs that made up this name corresponded to sounds needed to produce it. This is where our mysterious man from the beginning of the video enters the picture. Champollion picked up where Young left off. He knew Coptic, so the Frenchman was able to determine what many other hieroglyphs sounded like. The eureka moment was close. It came while he was studying a cartouche from a site dedicated to Ramses II. It had 4 symbols. The last 2 were the same. He determined this was the sound S. The first symbol was the sun. This is Ra or Re in Coptic. So the cartouche read Ra something SS. Can you already guess the name? Of course, it's Ramses. This breakthrough finally cracked the code. Ancient Egyptian wasn't a mishmash of cool-looking images. It was a phonetic language that Jean-François Champollion discovered in September of 1822. The stone slab is today known as the Decree of Memphis. The Egyptian council issued it in this city in the year 196 before current era. In it, they expressed their loyalty to the pharaoh. They erected identical stelae and temples all across Egypt. The Rosetta Stone was just one copy of them, but its content is less important than the fact that Champollion's translation gave these ancient peoples their voice again. During the 1800s, European scholars didn't think that the Egyptian civilization was much older than classical Greek or Roman. Now that scientists could read hieroglyphs, a whole new chapter of human history opened. One of the most famous finds in the history of archaeology happened in 1922. That's when the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The whole world admired King Tut's golden mask. But without Champollion's pioneering work, it would be impossible to know who its owner was. The young pharaoh's cartouche is phonetic. For instance, you pronounce the pictograph of a chick as the vowel U. The symbol for the key of life is an ankh, and there is a shepherd's crook in the end. It symbolizes the word ruler.
On October 30th, 1759, the inhabitants of the Middle East were jolted awake by an earthquake. Cracks appeared in the walls of their homes, roofs began to crumble. People ran out of their homes and gathered in open areas. But because of strong shocks, they kept losing their footing and falling. A month later, there was another earthquake, but it turned out to be even stronger. Trees broke, houses collapsed, deep cracks appeared in the ground. The disaster lasted for 2 minutes. Oases, roads, and cities were destroyed. Incredibly, Baalbek's ancient buildings withstood earthquakes. Some historians state that this majestic and mysterious place was built during the Roman Empire, but many researchers disagree. Whatever the truth is, the city is one of the main archaeological phenomena of humankind. The most amazing building of Baalbek is the Temple of Jupiter. The inhabitants of the Roman Empire believed that Jupiter held power over lightning and thunder. The building looked like a platform with 54 columns. A massive roof rested on these columns. Today, you can only see 6 70-foot-high columns. Each of them consists of 3 sections and resembles a pencil. The cores of these pencils were made of lead. This made the columns exceptionally strong. Each of these pieces of stone weighed an incredible 80 tons. That's the weight of 35 Ford Explorer SUVs. Look, this is the largest block in the Great Pyramid of Giza. But compared to the blocks from Baalbek, it doesn't even look that impressive. The foundation under the Temple of Jupiter was preserved. That's how specialists figured out it consisted of about 25 monolithic stones, weighing 450 tons each. It means that the blocks from Baalbek weigh almost 4 times more than the blocks from Egypt. There are 3 more enormous limestone blocks in the foundation. They weigh 800 tons each. This is more than twice the weight of a Boeing 747 plane. Ancient builders must have had a hard time carving such giants from a piece of stone. And after that, they also had to pull them to the construction site and lift them to a significant height. Repeating these logistics would probably turn out to be a nightmare for present-day builders. To do this amount of work, they would need modern equipment. But Baalbek's constructors didn't have trucks, cranes with circular saws, or electricity. How did the builders of the past manage to do this? Scientists have a theory that includes ropes, winches, and lever systems. Naturally, the engineers of the past made all the gadgets from wood. Around 3,000 feet away from the ruins of the temple complex, there's a quarry. Archaeologists suppose that's where the stones for the construction were cut. They found a block of limestone there. It seemed to be too large even for this incredible place. The monolith got called the Stone of the South. It was 65 feet long and 13 feet wide. The ancient builders didn't have time to completely separate it from its mother rock. A group of scientists from Austria estimated that this piece of limestone weighed more than 1,000 tons. That's like 3 Boeing aircraft or 160 African elephants. There was another surprise awaiting the archaeologists near the Stone of the South. It was the second monolith that weighed more than 1,200 tons. But the ancient builders didn't stop at that. They continued to work. In 2014, in the same quarry, German archaeologists unearthed a block that weighed 1,650 tons. No one has figured out yet why people of the past needed a piece of stone that weighed as much as 125 school buses. It's also unclear how they were going to move this giant and why they didn't finish the job. In any case, this third monolith is the largest processed piece of stone in human history. There are more questions than answers. Some researchers believe that people of the past had high-tech equipment. Others don't think so, but are eager to understand how the builders managed to move those stones. There's a huge number of ancient buildings and artifacts on the planet. Lots of them make researchers scratch their heads. Near the Pyramid of Djoser in Egypt, archaeologists have found a network of tunnels. This place is called Serapeum. It contains 24 sarcophagi weighing from 70 to 100 tons. The giant boxes are carved from a single piece of granite and covered with heavy lids. The sarcophagi are perfectly symmetrical. To the touch, their walls are as smooth as glass. Even with the current level of technology, this is very difficult to do. But the ancient Egyptians managed this feat. The Lycurgus cup is a priceless artifact and example of ancient nanotechnology. It's made of glass that can change its color. If you put a source of light in front of the cup, it turns green. If the light is behind the goblet, it becomes deep red. In this case, the figure of Greek king Lycurgus turns pale purple. Scientists understood how this color change worked only at the end of the 20th century. Through microscopes, they saw nanoparticles of silver, gold, and copper. They had been added to the glass matrix. Thanks to this, you can observe a color change called dichroism. Interestingly, the gold and silver were grounded into a fine dust. It's almost impossible to do this by accident. Most likely, the ancient experts knew for sure what they were doing. Bolivia has a curious place called Puma Punku. It looks as if an ancient giant played there with an enormous construction set. And after the game, they forgot to put the pieces back into the box. But there are no giants, and the huge stone blocks were carved by ancient builders over 1,500 years ago. Some of the rocks weigh 100 tons. The blocks were brought to an altitude of almost 13,000 feet above sea level from the quarry 60 miles away from the construction site. There's no forest in that area. This means the builders couldn't use trees to make wooden rollers. The monument belongs to the Inca civilization. Scientists are sure they didn't know anything about wheels. In 1992, the inhabitants of a Chinese village decided to drain a pond. Their ancestors had been using it to wash clothes and catch fish for hundreds of years. They kept pumping the water out for 17 days. At the bottom of the reservoir, they made an unexpected discovery. The villagers saw an entrance to a cave going down to a depth of 100 feet. The incredible find was named the Longyou Caves. Unknown builders carved out 320,000 square feet of galleries. There are separate rooms, bridges, pools, and columns that support the ceiling. The walls of the cave are covered with strange carved lines and patterns. Scientists haven't found any information about who built the caves and why they did it. The construction technology also remains a mystery. Antonio Stradivari lived in Italy in the 18th century. He created musical instruments. More than 600 of his works have survived to this day. 500 of them are violins. One of the instruments was sold at auction for $16 million. The violins made by this master sound clear and deep. Researchers can't understand why Stradivarius instruments produce such unique sounds. Perhaps it's all about the varnish the master used to cover the violins. The answer may also lie in the wood the instruments are made of. In those days, Europe had a cold climate. Because of this, the wood became denser, and the instruments made of it sounded especially pleasing to the ear. In the Indian city of Delhi, there's a 23-foot high pole. It weighs 6.5 tons and is made of 98% wrought iron. The 1,600-year-old pillar has no signs of rust or decay. Scientists believe that the monument is so well preserved thanks to the dry weather and the chemical composition of the metal. It might be resistant to corrosion. And still, researchers don't know how the blacksmiths managed to make an iron pillar that's not afraid of rust. It seems like a tough feat, even for modern metallurgists. The Al-Nasla rock is divided into two parts by a perfectly straight slit. Each boulder stands on a small pedestal. Some people believe this is the evidence of ancient laser technology. But geologists think the split happened due to the ground shifting or natural vibrations that occurred under the rock. This process led to the appearance of the crack. It had been deepening for thousands of years, and gradually, the natural monument took the form you can see today. The year is 1923. Two teenagers sneak out of their homes in the middle of the night in Florida City. Rumor had it that an old man was building a rock castle by himself. But every time someone tried to see what the old man was doing, he would stop working. The curious teens managed to sneak into Ed's backyard and saw something they could later describe as magic. They recalled seeing rocks moving around like helium balloons. The old man was moving up to 30 tons of stone by himself to build his castle. Even if he didn't allow anyone to see him working, he would proudly talk about it around the town. But whenever people asked how he was building a stone castle all on his own, he simply answered, "I cracked the secret of the pyramids." This story begins in Latvia, Edward Leedskalnin's home country. Edward was born in a small village on January 12, 1887. He was born in a family of stonemasons, which is probably where he learned ancient techniques of building. However, he grew up as a sickly boy, which meant he could never carry much weight or undergo heavy physical activity. At the age of 26, an unfortunate turn of events determined Ed's fate. The love of his life broke off their engagement, and heartbroken Ed decided to move to the United States. He lived in a couple of American states before finally moving to Florida, where his life's adventure started. Ed spent years searching for the right spot of land to build his dream house. He always rejected good farmland. When people wondered why, he only smiled. Finally, when he bought land of his own, it was deemed terrible by his close friends. The soil was bedrock. He could neither plow nor farm it, but it seemed perfect for what he was seeking to build. Ed's close friends would often describe him as eccentric. When asked why he wanted to build a house, he would only say, "It's for my sweet 16. Someday she's coming back." Then, he changed the topic of the conversation. It took Ed about 30 years to finish Coral Castle, and he did it all by himself. He would only work under the cloak of night and never let anyone see what he was doing. The completed Coral Castle embodies a number of unsolved mysteries. If you were to visit the site back then, you'd have to go through a 9-ton, 8-foot-tall revolving gate door that even a kid could push with just one finger. Ed was so proud of this door that he originally named the site Rock Gate Park. It was renamed Coral Castle only much later, after Ed's passing. Once inside, visitors would access the incredible wonders of Ed's constructions: towers, mystic symbols, furniture, and swing sets, all made entirely of monolithic blocks of stone. The stones are set on top of each other, using only their weight to keep them together. And believe it or not, the entire park gathers around 1,100 tons of stone. Today, If you visit Ed's living quarters, you'll even see the simple instruments he used to construct all of this: chisels, hammers, ropes, and pulleys. The type of work he did is difficult even with modern-day equipment, let alone without it. Coral Castle's main mystery lies in how Ed managed to do it. The only photograph of Ed Leedskalnin at work shows a simple leverage structure of a chain hoist attached to a wooden tripod. The tripod was made of old telephone poles with a small wooden box on top. What was in the box is, of course, a mystery. Unfortunately, he took his secrets with him, not sharing the truth of his work with anyone else. Yet, not all is lost, as there are many theories and speculation surrounding what could have happened there. One theory says that there is a harmonic grid inside the Earth's surface, something that would create anti-gravity spots around the globe. It's believed that Coral Castle was built in such a spot. This could explain why it took Ed so long to find land that pleased him. Maybe what he was looking for was a place that allowed him to experiment with anti-gravity forces. Yet, whenever Ed talked about his work, he would say he understood the laws of weight and leverage, and, sure thing, that he had cracked the secret of the pyramid builders. And what secret is that, you might ask? According to Ed himself, it has to do with magnetism. He even published a pamphlet called Magnetic Current. There, he explains that every object has magnetic particles inside of them. A person just needs to understand where they are located inside such objects. This way, objects can be lifted and moved around without much effort, just like moving something heavy underwater. Researchers say that if we assume Ed Leedskalnin and the pyramid builders used the same technique, then it would only have taken 4,700 workers to build the Great Pyramid of Giza, instead of the 20,000 to 100,000 that is currently estimated. But this story just keeps on getting more and more mysterious. In the late 1920s, Ed was finishing the construction of Coral Castle in Florida City. Rumors about his work had spread around town. People said Ed was hiding a stash of money somewhere in his living quarters. One night, a group of men waited until Ed was alone and broke into the castle to rob him. They couldn't find the money and, luckily, didn't harm Ed. But in the following days, he decided that it was best he moved out of that land. Of course, he took more than his toothbrush along with him. Ed decided to move the entire Coral Castle to another land 10 kilometers away from where he had built the park. Legend says he hired a truck driver and asked him to swear secrecy about what Ed intended to do. He asked the driver to look away while Ed loaded the truck by himself, moving all of the rocks without any help. With the truck loaded, Ed and his castle moved to Homestead, Florida, where the park is located until this day. In 1986, a group of engineers from Florida University was called to try to fix the park's gate entrance, the 9-ton revolving door that Ed was so proud of. They arrived with plenty of modern-day equipment, including a 20-ton crane. When the engineers took the door down, they noticed that Ed had used a strange circular stone at the bottom of the revolving door. The engineers couldn't understand how this frisbee-sized rock could withstand 9 tons of weight without breaking into pieces. They sent the rock to the geology department at the University of Florida, but the geologists simply returned the rock, saying they couldn't find a match of this rock in their databases. They couldn't determine its origin. The engineers put the 9-ton gate back into place, trying to use other techniques. At first, it didn't work without the base rock Ed had originally used. So, they had to cut the gate rock to make it work as a revolving door once again, proving that modern-day technology couldn't replicate what Ed had done single-handedly. Fast forward to 2011, and another man claimed to have cracked the code of the pyramid builders and Ed Leedskalnin himself. Wally Wallington, a retired construction worker from Lapeer County, Michigan, has managed to build using similar techniques to those used by Ed. Wallington is known for having built his personal Stonehenge in Michigan. He is said to have used simple machines, such as levers and counterweights, moving around multi-thousand-pound concrete blocks. Unlike Ed, Wallington has shared his techniques with the public. Multiple videos are showing the clever engineering he built from very simple materials. It sure is impressive. The man has moved his entire barn into another property just with the help of simple tools. However, there is no way to prove that these were the same techniques used to build Coral Castle. To this day, the secrets of Coral Castle haven't been unraveled. But hey, we can always keep trying to solve it. Imagine working 7 days a week on a large-scale construction site. You, along with thousands of others, carry millions of stone blocks and put them on top of each other according to a complex system. You work without modern construction equipment. You have no air conditioning or constant access to water. It's so hot outside that you can fry eggs on the road. You've been building the pyramid for decades, and now, when it's finally done, you enjoy the result of the colossal work of thousands of people. You're looking at a giant cultural monument of global value that will freeze in time and amaze people for tens of thousands of years. A few thousand years have passed. People in the 21st century see the pyramids and are like, wow, I can't believe humans have built this. Yeah, the people who built the pyramids wouldn't have appreciated such a theory. But actually, there are reasons to believe that people built it using some fantastic technology. From the outside, it seems the Great Pyramids are just big triangles of stone. People just put some heavy blocks on top of each other, and that's it. In fact, the design seems too perfect to be true. The pyramid consists of more than 2 million blocks. They lay so close to each other and are so even that you couldn't squeeze even a thin sheet of paper between them. Scientists still can't figure out the exact technology for building the Egyptian pyramids. One of the biggest and most famous is the Great Pyramid of Giza. This huge construction, well known all over the world, has one big secret. There should be a capstone on top of the pyramid. It's a triangular-shaped stone block, a small pyramid on top of a huge one. It's also called a pyramidion. The builders of ancient Egypt made it out of granite and limestone and covered it with gold. No records or old drawings prove that there was a pyramidion at the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza. But there's another ancient Egyptian structure with such a triangle, the Red Pyramid. It was built before the Great One, and its capstone has survived to this day. Archaeologists have found and reconstructed it. But where could the capstone of the Great Pyramid be? It's a mystery that still has no answer. Some are sure that some thieves have stolen it from the top. Maybe they just climbed up and pushed the pyramidion down. It makes perfect sense. The capstone was probably the most valuable element of the pyramid. Many scientists and archaeologists still don't know its exact purpose. Some believe that this peak covered with gold glorified the pharaohs. The capstone reflected moonlight at night and illuminated the entire space around it. During the day, the capstone reflected sunlight with its shiny surface. You could have noticed it from afar. The top of the pyramid was a kind of guiding star for lost travelers. All other stone blocks of the pyramid consist of limestone. People polish them to make them look shiny. In the past, they were even glowing and reflected light. You could see glowing pyramids from space, although they looked like tiny lights. Over thousands of years, winds, sandstorms, and rains have changed the pyramid's appearance. If people had taken care of them all this time, they would have looked like something out of science fiction movies, or the pyramids from Las Vegas. But unfortunately, we will never see their original appearance. Some archaeologists and scientists believe that the capstone could absorb the sun's energy and distribute it evenly throughout the pyramid. No one knows precisely why the Egyptians needed this technology. There's a theory the pyramids are ancient energy systems. The pharaohs applied this energy to use some unique technologies that were more advanced than all the achievements of the 21st century. and the triangular shape of the pyramids was ideal for boosting this electromagnetic energy. In theory, solar radiation, or electromagnetic forces, accumulated at the top of the pyramid, filled the inner rooms, and then went down the walls to the base. Any surface distortion could prevent the flow from spreading, so they had to create a perfectly smooth surface. That's why they installed the blocks so that nobody could squeeze a needle or razor blade between them. Many people believe in this theory because they built the pyramids from limestone. This material can hold energy inside itself. In the inner part, they created granite deposits to cause air ionization, that is, to create an electric charge. They also dug channels under the pyramid for water to transmit electricity. And at the top, they put a gold capstone, the best conductor of electricity. So, this is how you get a great power generator. Different cultures used similar technologies to create electricity all over the world. But these are all theories. If it had been working, humanity would have used these technologies today. There are mentions of the metal industry, chemistry, engineering, physics, mathematics, and astronomy in some ancient records. Most scientists don't believe in all these things. We know the detailed stages of the technology's development in different cultures. In the 21st century, scientists, historians, and anthropologists can track the evolution of all modern devices. If people had created some technological inventions in ancient times, the history of the world would have looked different. Perhaps all the achievements of antiquity could have been wiped off the face of the earth by global cataclysms, and it can happen to us. Just imagine how people would dig up a laptop in 5,000 years. Perhaps they wouldn't understand what kind of device it is. Another Egyptian wonder surrounded by mystery is the statue of the Sphinx. The Egyptians carved it out of a single massive piece of limestone about 4.5 thousand years ago. But scientists still don't know the exact date of its construction or who built it. People painted the Sphinx in different colors, so it looked much brighter and more vivid in the distant past. It was shining just like the Great Pyramids. Anyway, time hasn't only changed its appearance, but its name too. Initially, the Egyptians called it Hora-Mekhet. The Greeks renamed it the Sphinx about a few hundred years after it had been built. The Sphinx emphasized the greatness of the rulers of Egypt. It also performed a symbolic function of a watchdog guarding the tomb of the pharaoh and the paths leading to it. This version sounds realistic, since archaeologists have discovered many secret entrances at the foot of the Sphinx. Perhaps these rooms and intricate tunnels lead to underground halls with treasures. And treasures don't always mean gold and jewelry. According to legends and theories, the Sphinx guards the Hall of Records, the storage of all humankind's knowledge. The information about the ancient mythical state of Atlantis could be there. You can find many detailed maps of the internal dungeons of the Sphinx on the internet. They show structures 12 stories deep under the statue. It looks like a small city filled with gold, scrolls of knowledge, and various ancient artifacts. But don't believe all these maps. These are just theories. Several thousand years have passed, but people have very little information about it. Archaeologists know that there are still many strange and exciting things about the Sphinx that are still undiscovered. Some locals are afraid to research because they believe they can awaken something terrible from the underground depths. Therefore, it's mostly scientists from other countries who conduct the excavations. In 1998, scientists discovered strange tunnels leading to empty rooms under the Sphinx. They realized that some people tried to get there through tunnels in the past, and maybe those people took all the treasures that were there. One of the legends says that some powerful artifact lays beneath the Sphinx. Its technology can change the whole world, but the locals are hiding it because it can damage the planet. Some believe that you can find evidence of unknown technologies painted on the granite walls in the pharaohs' tombs. But most likely, these paintings and signs tell us the myths and legends of ancient Egypt. But what if Egyptian symbols and drawings are detailed instructions for using ancient technologies? What if the locals that lived at that time thought, people in the future won't be able to get energy themselves. Let's leave some detailed instructions for them. Anyway, there are many riddles and theories. In reality, the search for answers is a dangerous undertaking, since it's not easy to get into the underground halls. Excavations can ruin the structure of the entire Sphinx. Any person inside the tunnels may get lost and never be able to find their way back. Besides, it costs a lot of money. Now, what would be awesome is if people could invent some device that could scan underground areas and show their detailed models.
It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Sakara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Sakara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes, though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane. But this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oupart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history. And the Sakara bird isn't the only example of such a revolutionary concept. In 1901, a group of divers retrieved the Antikythera mechanism from an underwater shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's been dubbed the world's first analog computer and it's currently dated around 100 BCE. The bronze mechanism could tell the position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, as well as the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, and even the speed at which the moon moves through the sky. No one's sure who used it and how or where it was made, but it's obvious that it's extremely precise and way too advanced for its time. The first flushing toilets in the world were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Just kidding. The ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with this brilliant invention at the same time, around 4,000 years ago. The plumbing and sanitation were so well done that no one managed to design anything better until 2,000 years later. One ancient Minoan lavatory was discovered at the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat set over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop reservoir to an underground sewer. Other varieties got water from jugs. Only the super rich people could afford all this glory. So if you wanted to shop for real estate back then, the flushing toilet would be a telltale sign you were in the rich neighborhood. Automated doors became a cool, seemingly new invention back in 1931. But the technology behind them is actually much older. Think the 1st century CE old. Mathematician and engineer Heron of Alexandria came up with a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. To bring it into action, you need to light a fire to produce heat. There was a brass pot under the fire, half filled with water. The inventor connected the brass pot to containers that acted as weights. When the fire was burning, the water moved into the containers. They went down and pulled the ropes. It was nothing like a supermarket door that opens in front of you before you even have time to think. Heron's door took hours to open, and there was no way to stop the process. That's why they only opened the doors once a day before people entered the temple, to add some mysticism at the temple during ceremonies. Spooky. Looks like the first ever battery was invented in Baghdad around 2,000 years ago. A German archaeologist found this oval-shaped clay jar in 1938. Scientists are still not sure what purpose it served and who exactly invented it. There is a theory that it was used for electroplating objects with precious metals. When they filled it with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced around 1 volt of electricity. Another theory says it was a vessel for sacred scrolls. Would you like to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself? In 1508, he invented a glass lens with a funnel on one side. You were supposed to wear it with water inside to improve your vision. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So, around a century later, French scientist René Descartes decided to improve the idea and make the cornea contact the future lenses. Contacts because they contact your eyes, get it? The glass tube with liquid did help improve vision, but blinking was sadly impossible. 2.5 centuries later, new technologies in the glass industry let scientists design contacts that would fit in the eye and even let the wearer blink. Thanks, guys! Still, those lenses were made of heavy blown glass and didn't let the eye breathe. About 50 years later, contacts became plastic, lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant, but still covering the entire eye. And then, in 1948, an English optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and figured out they'd still be in place even if they covered only the cornea. Imagine you're living in 19th century London and need to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days to get there by ship. So when delivery time went from days to hours in 1858, it was a true sensation. The first message was sent by Queen Victoria herself. It was all made possible thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, running under the ocean. Sadly, the new cool invention only lasted a few weeks. It took years to bring it back to life.
You hear the word Paris, and a picture of the Eiffel Tower comes straight into your mind, or croissants. Or maybe you imagine going on a romantic stroll in the city of love, or croissants. But not many know that right below the bustling city of Paris, there is a series of underground passages, the catacombs. They're home to the remains of more than 6 million people. Whoa! But it wasn't always like that. Paris used to be a vast swamp. It was because most of the city was submerged in water at one time. Due to this, once the areas rose to the surface, the ground became rich in minerals, the most important being limestone. To extract it and use it to develop Paris, underground mines were dug up somewhere around the 14th century. They were dug horizontally to prevent collapse and to deal with the weight of the ceiling. Most of these mines were set up on the right side of the River Seine. Soon, Paris started expanding beyond its old city walls. Here's where it got tricky. The city started building on top of the land where they had dug all those tunnels. This caused some big problems, like the ground collapsing. In 1774, one of the roads in the suburbs collapsed about 100 feet into the ground. Due to rising safety concerns, officials decided to abandon the mines. The quarries were checked, and the tunnels were renovated to avoid future disasters. The bones ended up in the tunnels because of another major problem Paris faced a few years later. The growing population of the city caused an increase in the number of bodies. Cemeteries became overcrowded, and the city was actually so bad that at one point, bodies could not be taken care of properly. They started to rot and spread harmful bacteria. So those who were in charge of Paris got an idea. They picked a new spot that was like a secret hideout for bones, one of the old mines. The process of moving the bones from cemeteries to the tunnel started in the late 1780s. They began with the biggest cemetery in Paris, the Saint-Innocent Cemetery. They didn't want to scare people, so they moved the bones at night. The remains went into 2 big holes in the ground and then got stacked in the tunnels by the quarry workers. They continued moving the bones until Paris developed into a city in the 1860s. The official name given to the collection of mines turned cemetery was the Paris Municipal Ossuary. But this name never became popular, and the tunnels instead became known as the catacombs. While the bones were still being added to the collection, the officials saw fit to open the place for public viewing in the year 1809. Tourists had to make a prior appointment and sign a guest book. As time passed, famous people started visiting, including the future King Charles X, Austrian Emperor Francis I, and Napoleon III. Of course, the rules for visiting have been changing over time. But now the catacombs, also known as the Ossuary of Den Pharaoh, have become a famous tourist spot. Around 5 million people come to explore it every year. What drives them? Well, in addition to the creepy but rich history, the catacombs are also considered one of the most haunted places on Earth, and there are several unsolved mysteries surrounding them. Some years back, a camcorder was discovered in the catacombs with a bit of footage. ABC Family showed the video in their documentary. In the clip, you can see a man very deep inside the catacombs, exploring alone. The video is from his point of view, and he sees something strange. He runs away terrified and eventually drops his camera. What happened to this man is still unknown. He was never found or identified. There are also reports of people getting lost in the catacombs, the most famous being a doorkeeper who got lost in 1793. His body was found 11 years later near an exit. How he passed away remains a mystery. There are also some not-so-eerie but equally strange mysteries surrounding the catacombs. There are people who like exploring the tunnels on their own. They're known as cataphiles. These people go into the quarries that have been abandoned to the public and long forgotten. Some explorers discovered secret water pools in the abandoned areas, and people would go to take a dip there. In 2004, police patrolling an unexplored area came across a 5,300 square foot cavern with a movie theater. There was a screen, projection equipment, some classic movies, and even chairs. There was also a restaurant-like setting nearby, 3 telephone lines, and, well, electricity, which hinted that a group of people had been living there or regularly visiting. But when the police came back 3 days later with experts to find the source of the electricity, they found that the wire had been cut off. Only a note was left behind: "Do not try to find us." Such enthusiasts existed in the past, too. Once, a Parisian farmer did the same and came across button mushrooms growing in the catacombs. He saw an opportunity to make easy money, and he actually created mushroom farms in the tunnels. He even got official permission for it. By 1950, 100 farmers had been working inside growing mushrooms. There's also a scary legend about the catacombs that some people believe in. According to it, at midnight, unexplainable voices can be heard in the catacombs. They try to convince people to go further inside the catacombs until they can't find their way out. There's no strong evidence whether this story is true or not, but thinking about it is still scary. Due to safety issues, today only a small part of the catacombs can be legally toured by the public, less than 2 miles, while the catacombs go on for 200 miles. And still, the tour is an hour long, and it perfectly captures what's worth seeing. Solo traveling is extremely dangerous, as there is the possibility of getting lost. No thanks. In 2017, 2 teenagers entered the system through a secret passage. They were found 3 days later and had to be treated for hypothermia. The tunnels, damp and old, have an average temperature of 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep in mind that the entrance alone is uncomfortable enough to turn some people away. To get inside, you have to go down a winding staircase that takes you a little more than 65 feet below the surface. In the beginning, you find yourself in a well-lit room filled with interesting information and displays. But as you move forward, the place gets eerily silent. You pass through a creepy entrance that boldly declares this in French, which when translated English is something like, "Stop, this is the Empire of Doom." It's not exactly a warm welcome, and that's because the Paris catacombs are known for their haunted reputation. As you move deeper, the sounds of the world above fade away, and soon you are surrounded by the silence of the earth below. The bones themselves are placed strategically, almost in artistic patterns. This was the idea of a man who was once in charge of the place. He turned the bones into a kind of underground museum with cool structures like columns, plaques, altars, and even some weirdly shaped forms that some people consider art. Popular all year round, the catacombs become particularly loaded around Halloween. People organize special parties or events near the place too. But the most bizarre thing was offered by the catacombs themselves through Airbnb. The famous rental service allowed 2 guests to sleep in the catacombs. They were offered a bed for Halloween night and breakfast. Upon checking in, they were told tales and the history of the catacombs. This way, they went to bed fully aware of the fact that they were sleeping among the remains of 6 million people. Yes, it remains to be seen. It's nighttime, and you're about to walk inside Pharaoh Tutankhamun's final resting place. You know, King Tut. You don't have a torch, but at least you came with a flashlight. You walk down several flights of stairs and observe how the walls are carved in hieroglyphics and what looks like a spell. Those who take anything from this place will be doomed for life, the spell says. Even if you don't really believe it, this scares you a little bit. You find a huge stone door. Is it a trap? You manage to open it, but oh no, it's only an empty chamber. You check your map. It seems like you're heading in the right direction. After what feels like hours, you realize you must be trapped inside a labyrinth. You try to retrace your steps, but you can't find the door where you came in from anymore. That's it, you think to yourself. You've fallen for the Pharaoh's trap. What's worse, you didn't bring a lunch. Okay, so we've all seen Hollywood movies where the main character is exploring ancient ruins and faces some seriously dangerous traps, right? We've been told Egyptian royalty protected their final resting places with venomous scorpions and snakes, sliding doors that will trap you for life, and giant rolling boulders that will crush anyone on their paths. The thing is, were these traps truly real? Well, I regret to be the one to break it to you, but this is all fiction. These elaborate traps were too technologically advanced for ancient civilizations to pull off. That is not to say, however, that there weren't any traps at all. Ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians and the Mayans, are known for their practice of building entire monuments dedicated to the ones who had passed away. These structures would often reflect the position of person occupied in society. So, for the really important people, the VIPs of their times, massive monuments were built to host their bodies long after they were gone. Some of these civilizations believed that a person's life would continue on the other side of the veil. For that reason, a person would be buried together with the belongings of their current life. If they had a lot of money and power and stuff, that meant their resting places would be filled with riches and gold. Now imagine if you lived in ancient Egypt and you knew exactly where all the pharaohs' tombs were located and had heard rumors of the amount of wealth kept in these places. Maybe you would be tempted to go check it out, right? We're talking about large rooms filled from floor to ceiling with golden artifacts, jewels, and even money. I mean, it does sound tempting. And since there weren't any security guards protecting the entrance of these places, Egyptians needed to get creative as to how they would protect these riches. These old civilizations found some traps to be useful. A recurring one was building empty rooms inside the monument to confuse a burglar. Now, let's take a look at Amenhotep III's final resting place as an example. It was built in the city of Luxor, in a spot also known as the Western Valley of the Kings. Two French engineers originally discovered the monument between 1905 and 1914 CE. The structure is huge and has more than 10 chambers, connected by long corridors and steep stairways. The King's Chamber is the most hidden one, and for an outsider to try and find it, they will probably enter a lot of empty rooms beforehand. Other pharaohs tried to protect their riches by commissioning monuments with false doors concealing pits that were up to 20 feet deep. This way, an unwarned and unwanted visitor would be surprised by the deep hole on their way to the king's resting chamber. Alongside false doors, pharaohs made sure to build labyrinth-style corridors and false walls. This way, robbers could take hours or days before they found the king's real chamber. As to pits with poisonous snakes on them, if there were any reptiles inside these monuments, they probably got inside on their own, and would most likely not stay there for long. There is no way snakes would survive years and years without food inside these pits. So yes, another Hollywood-induced belief right there. If these traps seem boring to you, archaeologists did find an interesting deterrent in the final resting place of the Red Queen of Palenque in Mexico. Palenque was one of the most powerful Mayan cities in pre-Columbian Mexico, and the Red Queen was believed to be the grandmother of the last Mayan king, undoubtedly a person of immense importance to the empire. In her honor, a huge monument was built to keep her body after her passing. The discovery of the tomb itself was already thrilling. Archaeologists found an ancient monument when digging at the site back in 1994. The first thing they found was a room with a hidden door. Once they opened the door, they discovered a long corridor. Finally, at the end of this corridor was the Queen's chamber. The team of archaeologists was beyond excited to unearth this chamber with the mummy of the Queen herself still inside it. They found her to be accompanied by her pearls, jade shells, and expensive rocks. But as the team explored the remains, they saw something rather strange. The room was filled with a red-colored powder. Researchers knew that the color red was important to the Mayan people, and that much of their clothing and buildings were decorated with this color. But they didn't understand why the queen was buried with this unknown red substance. After they took a sample back with them for further analysis, they discovered that the red powder was cinnabar, a very dangerous mineral. This powder, when inhaled, can cause, shall we say, severe health damage to a person. The team concluded that this could only be a trap for anyone trying to steal her riches. Okay, so dangerous powders might have worked as the most intense traps we've seen until now. But perhaps the cheapest way to keep out unwanted visitors was to advertise spells written out all over the monument. We'd probably laugh at these today, but back in the day, they were more or less effective. Spells usually said that the person who took anything from that place would meet a tragic fate. Some spells said that robbers would lose their houses in big fires or terrible floods. Other spells said burglars would have incurable and undiagnosed health issues, but they weren't really enough to stop people from taking any gold. There are some stories surrounding how these spells might have been real. One of them is from the famous British Egyptologist Howard Carter, the one responsible for unearthing Pharaoh Tutankhamun's resting place in the 1920s. After months of unsuccessful digging, Carter discovered the tomb's existence by chance. He found the entrance to a stairway right beneath the soil where he had been searching all those months. With the help of a team, he cleared the piles of sand blocking the stairs and discovered a doorway. The door had several royal symbols carved into it, and Carter knew this could only mean a very important person had been buried there. And he was right. With a chisel, he made a hole in the top left-hand corner of the doorway and lit his vision with the help of a candle. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, the reflection of several golden and jeweled items crowding the chamber before him. Lost for 3,000 years, Carter had just discovered the final resting place of King Tut. But the story didn't finish here. This discovery was accompanied by a series of unfortunate events that led people to believe it had something to do with the pharaoh's spell. Carter himself mysteriously passed away just a few years later, and some of his assistants lost their houses in floods, just like one of the spells threatened. Some say it's just coincidental, as there's no real proof of these things being connected. Well, what do you think? Was this an effective trap after all? Consider the Great Pyramids, one of the original 7 wonders of the world and the only one that still exists today. Did you know that the pyramids of Giza weren't the only pyramids out there? And they weren't even the first ones. First, there were the pretty good pyramids, but they didn't catch on. Nah, I made that up. Back to the story. In ancient Egypt, it was believed that kings were chosen by gods to serve on earth as their mediators. In the afterlife, they were expected to become gods themselves. The pyramid complex was built to make sure that the king had everything they might need in the afterlife. The complex included the pyramid, a palace, and temples. The tomb in the pyramid, where the king was buried, was filled with many things they might need, like furniture, food, and gold vessels. Actually, the first pyramid had been built 80 years before the first pyramid of Giza appeared. Overall, there were around 100 of them. Some weren't finished though, since the construction took a while and not every pharaoh lived long enough to see the end of the construction. And now let's talk about the construction itself. The biggest of the pyramids of Giza is as tall as a 40-story building. So how on earth did they manage to build a structure that massive 5,000 years ago, long before machines and other equipment appeared? Well, let's figure it out. So Pharaoh Khufu ascended the throne around 2575 BCE, and his architects started the construction of the oldest and biggest of the pyramids of Giza. He figured that over 2 million limestone blocks had to be used to build the pyramid, each weighing around 2.5 tons, around the weight of a rhino. The architect wanted to finish the construction in 20 years. To make it possible, a stone had to be carried and pushed into place every 4 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year, except leap year. So obviously, a lot of workers were needed to make it happen. Many believe that it was enslaved people who worked at the pyramid's construction site, but that's not true. Workers came from all over Egypt to contribute to the project. All in all, around 25,000 of them. The Egyptians were doing all kinds of work, starting with manual labor and crafting tools to administrative work. They all worked around 10 hours a day. They were housed and well-fed, and they were overall living a more comfortable life than an average Egyptian could afford at that time. Supposedly, the builders lived in a nearby temporary city and were a highly organized community with a strong leader. The pyramids seemed to be designed to align with the points on a compass, and their sides symbolized the rays of the sun. But back at that time, there were no compasses. Ancient Egyptians figured out the directions themselves and with amazing precision. To align the pyramids, they used 2 constellations. The construction site was arranged on the west bank of the Nile River. This also had a symbolic meaning. Just like the sun sets in the west, life sets in the west as well. The second pyramid of Giza was for Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khafre. It's a bit smaller, but this one has the famous noseless statue of the Sphinx. Of course, originally it had a nose. I would tell you what happened to it, but it's still a mystery, and no one knows for sure. Sphinxes have the body of a lion and the head of a human. They were considered guardians of important areas. This famous Sphinx, also pronounced Sphinx, has the head of Pharaoh Khafre and is guarding his pyramid, facing the sunrise. The Sphinx is one of the biggest and oldest statues in the world. Originally, it not only had a nose, but was also painted. Scientists have discovered traces of the red color of its face. So, most likely, the Sphinx was painted red. There are also remains of yellow and blue color on its body. The statue definitely wasn't boring. Till around 1800, the Sphinx was buried up to its shoulders until an adventurer with a team of 160 men dug it out. But let's get back to the construction. The workers, of course, needed stone blocks. There were two main places where people could get these stones. One source was close to the construction site, but that fossil-lined yellow stone was only suitable for the pyramid's interior. The limestone blocks for the exterior were hauled from 8 miles away on 30-foot-long sleds. Apparently, it wasn't too hard to pull them. The sand mixed with the right amount of water was pretty slick, and 10 people could move a sled even with a rock weighing so much. Surprisingly, cutting off a block of limestone wasn't the biggest problem. When in the ground, it was soft and could be split relatively easy. But after getting exposed to the air, limestone hardens. So the most difficult part was to shape the blocks. That step was crucial because the smallest inaccuracies could lead to the whole pyramid collapsing. So, okay, those limestones were mined, carried on a sled, shaped, and then what? How could they be put into place? Well, this is still a mystery. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of a ramp system that dates back around the time the pyramids were being built. So historians have come to the consensus that, most likely, the Egyptians designed a unique ramp system to move and pull huge stone blocks. The most common opinion is that there were several ramps around the pyramid. There probably was a central ramp with 2 staircases on each side of it built over the pyramid stones. The ramp was growing as the pyramid was getting higher. People might have been walking up the stairs, pulling up stones on wooden sleds. But this is just one of the options. Other experts say that the ramps were around the pyramid, and some say that the ramps were inside the pyramid. Maybe we will never know for sure, and it'll forever remain a mystery. The exterior limestone of the pyramid was polished with sand and stone until it gleamed. On top, there was a gold and silver capstone, which glimmered over Egypt like a second sun. So that's how it was 5,000 years ago. Now, about the interior. Surprisingly, there's not much inside the pyramid. Most of it is just solid stone with very little open space. But let's take a quick look inside. From the entrance, there are 2 stairways, one going down and the other going up. They take us to the chambers. There are 3 of them inside. Now, why is that? Apparently, throughout the whole construction, a burial chamber had to be prepared at all times, just in case a pharaoh kicked the bucket before the construction ended. So, separate chambers were built one after another as the construction progressed. The last of them was the main one. It's called the King's Chamber. It's the one where Khufu was resting. It's the biggest room at the very heart of the pyramid, and there's a big passageway leading to it. It was likely used as a kind of elevator to move granite up to build the interior. Granite was also used to make 5 stories of support beams to ensure that the pyramid didn't collapse. And we can see that it worked since it's been standing for centuries. Unfortunately, none of these chambers have hieroglyphs on the walls. If you want to see the writings, you should go to the decorated tombs near the pyramids. Those pieces of art are depiction of ancient Egypt's culture and daily life. The texts allow researchers to study their language and grammar. The treasures that once were in the pyramids have been taken by people. There are also many secret tunnels and passages inside the pyramids. But even today, no one knows the whole plan of the interior. Scientists have been sending little robots with cameras inside for many years, but there's still a lot we don't know about the pyramids. Now they're trying to use an X-ray to scan the pyramids from the outside, without going inside. So yeah, ancient Egyptians did create a mystery no one has been able to crack for 5,000 years already.
The ancient city of Taposiris Magna is hidden on the northern coast of Egypt. These days it has very little of its former glory, but what lies beneath it may hold the secret to uncovering a famous mystery, that of Cleopatra, the most memorable Egyptian queen in history. The recently discovered tunnel is also known as a geometric miracle for its time. Excavations have uncovered a 43-foot-long structure below the ground, which is partially submerged in water. Its shape and construction technique are similar to that of the Eupalinos tunnel, another amazing ancient discovery. This one is located in Greece and was built by excavating simultaneously from 2 points, aiming to have them meet in the middle. The use of math and geometry to make this construction was astonishingly precise for those days, more so since it was built near a mountain. Archaeologists that have been working on the Taposiris Magna site since 2004 believe this tunnel may lead to the lost tomb of Cleopatra. The clues they found so far seem to back up this theory. For starters, the city and its temple were built by one of Cleopatra's ancestors, Ptolemy II. All the architecture seems to indicate it was dedicated to the ancient spirit Osiris and his queen Isis. Throughout her reign, Cleopatra did try to associate herself with Isis, so it may be no surprise she chose this location as her final resting place. Scientists have yet to pinpoint Cleopatra's tomb, but research continues with the help of modern technology. To study this location better, archaeologists have even used a special device called ground-penetrating radar. This tool allows us to analyze what lies beneath the ground without being intrusive. Since this tunnel is so old, research needs to be done very delicately. Seeing pictures of what's underground before you start digging is incredibly useful and has been done here since 2011. Finally discovering Cleopatra's tomb may help us piece together her story, especially what might have happened during the last portion of her life, which is still surrounded by mystery. We still don't know the exact cause of her passing. Some believe she may have let herself be bitten by a poisonous Egyptian cobra. Others have suggested that she was well accustomed to toxic substances, even hiding some in her hairbrush in case she ever needed it. But that's not to say she chose to use it on herself. We do have a lot of other interesting information on Cleopatra that's equally as impressive, like the fact that she had a stylist. Most of the images you've seen depicting this famous queen show her wearing black eyeliner. This look was put together by Airas, a woman known to have been her personal beautician. She traced the long line from her eyes to her temples, a makeup technique still used today to enhance the eyes. Airas was an important figure throughout Cleopatra's life, known also as her confidant and close friend. There are even theories that suggest Airas was there by her side when she passed away. Despite her well-thought-out looks, Cleopatra wasn't as pretty as she's described. Or at least, that's what recent research has pointed out. Sure, if we look at movies and modern imagery, she's depicted as this incredibly beautiful woman with symmetrical and delicate features. However, if we look at coins showcasing her image from back in the day, her looks are rather average. Her image on the coins might have been adjusted, too, to make the queen look stronger in the eyes of her people. So there is no trusted source available to confirm her image, but her description in most pieces of ancient literature speaks of her other qualities, like her voice and personality, not of her beauty. Cleopatra might have been the most famous Egyptian queen to this day, but she wasn't the first choice. She did have an older sister, Berenice, that was initially supposed to take the throne. Berenice passed away before she could do that, so Cleopatra took on the role, and began investing in her education. She traveled throughout the country quite frequently, so she could become accustomed to her people and their needs. She was only 18 when the responsibilities were passed down to her, and immediately gained popularity because of her intelligence and education. Her taste in literature was quite good too. She was known to be a fan of Homer, the famed Greek philosopher and poet. Cleopatra loved to write as much as she loved to read. There are even claims that she wrote a book on medicine and cosmetics, but we have no evidence to this day that such work ever existed. Part of being a great leader back then meant you had to speak multiple languages. Cleopatra clearly understood that, and that's why she's rumored to have known many languages to varying degrees. Some archaeologists suggested she spoke Greek, Egyptian, and Ethiopian, as well as many Arabic dialects. She might have even spoken Latin, but there's little evidence to support this claim. She might not have had angelic looks, but Cleopatra was really careful with the way she looked, even with her diet. She was known to have enjoyed simple meals, including a variety of fish. Since she lived close to the Mediterranean Sea, it's really no surprise. As a treat, she liked to eat stuffed pigeons, which she also served to her guests. Other dishes on the menu included vegetables and fava bean soup. Fruits and nuts weren't missing from her diet either, and she was also a big fan of honey. Recently, a team of experts has even tried to recreate her famous perfume. Think of it like the ancient equivalent of Chanel No. 5. Cleopatra was known to be a fan of luxurious scents, which she believed could even influence how people treated her when they met. The basis of this scent is myrrh, a resin gathered from a local tree. Other ingredients added to the mixture were also found back in the day, like cardamom, olive oil, and cinnamon. The results may not be quite as delicate as the perfumes we know and use today. Its consistency was way thicker, and the scent lasted way longer. When she was at the height of her power, Cleopatra might have been the richest person in the world. Back in the day, she ruled over a territory that stretched across the Mediterranean, from modern-day Libya in the west through Egypt to Syria in the east. This is the largest territory ever ruled over by a woman. In today's currency, her worth might have been somewhere around $95 billion. The calendars we use today may have been introduced by Cleopatra herself. She presented the idea of leap years and leap days to Caesar, the Roman emperor she was known to have been close with. Taking her advice, Caesar made these adjustments part of the official Roman calendar. The ancient Egyptians already knew the year was longer than precisely 365 days. They discovered this by studying the brightest star in the sky, called Sirius, and concluded that a year is actually 365 1/4 days long. It was Elizabeth Taylor that famously introduced Cleopatra to pop culture when she played her in the 1963 film bearing the same name. Up until that point, it was the most expensive film ever made. It was originally supposed to cost somewhere around $2 million, but ended up costing a mind-boggling $44 million. That's mostly because of script and production issues. To make this iconic movie, producers created 79 sets from scratch, as well as over 26,000 costumes for the cast. Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra costumes alone cost somewhere around $200,000. Thankfully for the producers, the movie made headlines and was well received by critics, making it a box office success. A lot of people associate Cleopatra with another famous Egyptian ruler, King Tutankhamun, nicknamed King Tut. Surprisingly, apart from both of them being Egyptian pharaohs, they have nothing else in common. For starters, King Tut lived around 1,300 years before Cleopatra did, and there is also no connection regarding their ancestry. Cleopatra had Macedonian Greek roots, while King Tut was a native Egyptian.
And now we're off to almost 5,000 years ago. Let me take you to ancient Egypt, where back in 2550 BC, guess what? The construction of the Great Pyramids of Giza started. People learned to build cathedrals and skyscrapers, but it wasn't until recently that these massive buildings appeared. It's still a mystery to even modern scientists how these pyramids were built 5,000 years ago. No wonder they are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They're also the oldest of them and the only wonder of the ancient world that still exists in the 21st century. It must have taken a lot of cooperation to build a thing that massive, even for today's metrics. But the Giza pyramids weren't the first pyramids ever. The first one, called the Step Pyramid, was built around 80 years before the first pyramid of Giza in 2630 BC for King Djoser. It wasn't meant to be extraordinary, but ended up being quite impressive. It was a pyramid of 6 stepped layers of stone. It was 204 feet high, which is as tall as a 19-story building. And it was the tallest building that existed at that time. It wasn't just a pyramid though, it was surrounded by a whole complex of buildings, including even courtyards. In ancient Egypt, people believed in the afterlife, so everyone, especially kings, wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to get ready for it. Here's why the pyramid complex was perfectly supplied with a lot of objects people used every day. The complex included a pyramid and a kind of a palace. Those buildings had many things the king loved and might need one day, like furniture, food, and gold vessels. After Djoser, building pyramids became common practice, but many pyramids weren't finished. It would usually take about 20 years to build one, but many rulers reigned way less than that. Overall, there are more than 100 pyramids. The most famous pyramids are the Great Pyramids of Giza. The first one and the biggest one was built for Pharaoh Khufu, around 2550 BC. Initially, it was 481 feet tall, which is as tall as a 40-story building. The second pyramid was built for Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khafre, around 2520 BC. It's just a bit shorter, usually standing at 471 feet high, a 39-story building. This is the pyramid with the famous statue of the Sphinx. Sphinxes have a lion's body and a human head. They were built to guard important areas. This one has the head of Pharaoh Khafre and is guarding his pyramid, facing the sunrise. The Sphinx is most well known and is one of the world's biggest and oldest statues. Originally, it had red color and did have a nose. It's still possible to see the trace of red pigment by its ears. But no one knows exactly when the nose disappeared. For some time, the Sphinx was sort of hidden underground, being covered with sand up to its shoulders. Luckily, in the early 1800s, an adventurer with a team of 160 people dug it out. The third pyramid of Giza is the smallest one, being more than twice shorter. Originally, it was 218 feet high, about the height of a 20-story building. Built in 2490 BC, it was a pyramid for Khafre's son, Menkaure. The pyramids are designed to align with the points of the compass, and their sides symbolize the rays of the sun. But back at the time, there were no compasses. Ancient Egyptians figured out the directions themselves, and with amazing precision. To align the pyramids, they used 2 constellations. Originally, the pyramids were covered in smooth white limestone and had a gold-silver top to reflect the sun. Later, the white limestone was taken from the pyramids by other kings and used for other buildings. Scientists estimated that ancient Egyptians used about 2.3 million stone blocks to build the first pyramid. Each block weighed more than 1 ton. This is the weight of a rhino. Some blocks were even bigger, being almost as heavy as an elephant. 4.5 millennium ago, there was no modern equipment to help build it. There were no machines, no wheels, and even no steel. The only metal available to them was copper. Even today, scientists aren't sure how the Egyptians managed to build the pyramids. There are no records left that would shed light on it. Some even think that Egyptians wanted to keep it as their secret and didn't even record it on purpose. Many believe that poor people and foreigners built the pyramids, but it's not true. Actually, the builders were very skilled workers, and they were fed and paid well. The archaeologists claim that the builders lived in a nearby temporary city and were a highly organized community with a strong leader. Scientists say that around 20,000 people worked on each pyramid complex, and it took about 20 years to build each. It probably was a national project. The construction site was large in resources, and food and essentials were likely to be contributed from all parts of Egypt. Even with all that support, it remains unclear how people managed to cut, transport, and assemble those huge stones. One of the theories suggests the stones were most likely transported on boats down the Nile River. Then there was a harder part. They had to be moved to the construction site. For that, they probably used wooden sleds. It wasn't very hard to pull them because the sand mixed with the right amount of water was pretty slick. And 10 people could move a sled even with a rock weighing 1 ton pretty easily. Finally, one last problem. The stones had to be lifted and put into place. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of the ramps system that dates back to when the pyramids were built. Most likely, the Egyptians designed a unique system to move and pull huge stone blocks, but no one knows what it looked like exactly. The most common opinion is that there were several ramps around the pyramid to help move the blocks. The ramp was growing with the pyramid getting higher. They suppose people were walking up the stairs, pulling the stone on the wooden sled up in the middle on the sandy ramp. But this is just one of the options. Others say that the ramps were going around the pyramid. Some say the ramps were inside the pyramid. But we'll never know for sure, and it'll forever remain a mystery, just like the ancient Egyptians wanted. Surprisingly, there's not much inside the pyramids. Most of it is just solid stone with very little open space. But let's take a quick look inside the biggest of the pyramids of Giza. From the entrance, there are 2 stairs, one going down and the other one going up. The descending one takes you to a chamber located underground. That's where the pharaohs are, but not in this pyramid because Khufu wanted to stay higher. The underground room is partly unfinished. The room with Khufu's sarcophagus is called the King's Chamber. It's upstairs and then through the tall and long Grand Gallery. Below the King's Chamber, there's a room called the Queen's Chamber. There are no queens though, and no one is sure why the room is called this. Unfortunately, none of these have any hieroglyphs on the wall. They're just bare. If you want to see them, you should go to the other rooms that are decorated. Those pieces of art are depictions of ancient Egypt's culture and daily life. The texts allow researchers to study their language and grammar. Sadly, the treasures that once were here in the pyramid are long stolen. From that room, there are several tunnels for an unknown purpose. There are many tunnels and passages inside the pyramids. There are many chambers and shafts and secret ways. Scientists have been sending little robots with cameras there for some decades already. And the robots did discover another chamber a bit upstairs with hieroglyphs on the walls. But even today, much of the pyramids is still unknown, and there's no so-called building plan of the pyramids. Egyptians did create a mystery no one can crack for 4,500 years already. Scientists recently started to X-ray the pyramid to learn what's inside it without entering it and its narrow, mysterious tunnels. The most exciting accidental discovery I've made in my life was a $10 bill in my old winter jacket. Some folks are luckier though, as they find underground cities from centuries ago or make inventions that turn them into millionaires. Velcro was invented after a routine walk in the woods. Kellogg's Cornflakes were inspired by a chipped tooth, and Play-Doh saved a business empire from falling by chance. Back in 1998, electrical engineer John Williams found something that looked like an electrical plug sticking out of the ground. He started digging and noticed that it was stuck in a small rock. He found it in a rural location in North America, far from civilization, industrial complexes, airports, factories, and electronic plants. This piece of electronics embedded into a solid granite stone got the nickname Enigmalith and a price tag of $500,000. Some scientists are sure it's a big hoax and not a souvenir left by some visitors from space, as Williams claims. But the finder of the rock wanted to prove that it was a real piece of ancient technology, some sort of an electrical connector. If it's not a hoax, then this little find could be proof that humans, or some other civilization from the past, were way more advanced than we ever thought. They must have managed to invent a way to transmit electricity long before humans in the 19th century. He offered scientists to take a look at this find and establish what it really is without breaking the rock open, but there were no takers. Williams consulted an engineer and a geologist, and both confirmed there were no traces of glue on the electronic component. It hasn't been welded either, so it must be as old as the rock, which is around 100,000 years old, according to geological analysis. Dr. John Kellogg had a philosophy of biological living with regular exercise, massage, plenty of water, zero bad habits, caffeine, and no meat. At the end of the 19th century, he looked over a health institute in Michigan. He once whipped up a mix of flour, oats, and cornmeal. He thought that by baking whole grains at high temps, they'd be easier on the stomach and healthier overall. He baked the mix twice and first made cookies, but a patient chipped a tooth on that version. Then he decided to break it into small pieces. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how Kellogg cornflakes came to be, with so many versions of the story floating around. Kellogg's wife, Ella, and his brother Will both claimed they played a role in creating the flakes, along with several other family members and sanitarium staff. The company lore says that it all went down one night in 1898, when some wheat-based cereal dough was left out too long, fermenting in the process. When rolled out thin, the slightly moldy dough turned into these perfect large thin flakes that got all crispy and yummy in the oven. Over the next few years, Will Kellogg kept tweaking the recipe and realized that corn, not wheat, made even crunchier, tastier flakes. His brand, Kellogg's Cornflakes, has grown into a multi-billion-dollar company. Swiss engineer Georges de Mestral once went for a walk with his dog and came back with a concept that would later go to space. Once they got back from the woods, de Mestral noticed that his pants and his dog's fur were covered in the tiny barbs of the cocklebur plant. He examined the burrs under the microscope and noticed that they were shaped like tiny hooks that stuck to loops on clothes and fur. He decided to recreate that natural tech to design an extra strong fastener, one with many practical uses. He was testing different materials for his invention for so many years and finally settled on nylon. He also needed to design a special type of loom that could weave the fibers in the right size, shape, and density. It took de Mestral a total of 14 years until he introduced the world to Velcro, which means velvet and hook in French. De Mestral was hoping his invention would replace the zipper on clothes, but the fashion world found Velcro cheap-looking and unattractive. But NASA didn't think so, and used Velcro for astronaut spacesuits and helmets in the 1960s. Now, Velcro is used everywhere, from footwear to toys to airline seat cushions. Before the middle of the 20th century, most homes were heated with coal. It left soot throughout the house, which was especially visible on wallpapers. Kutal Products was the largest company that sold wallpaper cleaner, but in the 50s, more and more people switched to gas, oil, and electricity, and the sooty buildup problem was mostly solved. The owner of Kutal Products was trying to save his business. Meanwhile, his sister-in-law read that wallpaper cleaner could be used to make holiday decorations. She worked as a nursery school teacher, and modeling clay was pretty hard for her students to handle, so she decided to test this material for molding into different shapes, and it works out just fine. She told her relatives about the discovery and suggested a name for it: Play-Doh. The Kutal company was about to go bankrupt, so it was a great alternative for a new business. Soon enough, Macy's and Marshall Field got interested in the new toy and started selling it. Play-Doh was originally only in one color, white, but soon expanded to red, blue, and yellow. They also made several changes to the original recipe, but the mixture is still mostly the same as when it was used to clean wallpapers. An urban legend says that if you take all the Play-Doh compound ever made and put it through their Fun Factory playset, you'll get a snake that will wrap around the planet 300 times. A man in Turkey was renovating his home when he knocked down a wall in his basement with a sledgehammer. He found a tunnel behind the wall that led to an ancient underground city. The tunnel led to more tunnels and then halls and chambers. It turned out to be a whole underground complex with 18 stories and without a single inhabitant, abandoned a long time ago. It was the city of Derinkuyu, built thousands of years ago, a home for up to 20,000 people. Whoever built it had great skill, and it's rather easy to build tunnels out of the soft rock, but cave-ins are a big risk. None of the floors at Derinkuyu have ever collapsed. The city had a complex ventilation system with over 15,000 shafts. The upper levels had the best ventilation and were used for living and sleeping quarters. The lower levels were mainly used for storage, but they also had a dungeon. In between, there were room for domestic animals, a school, a convent, and small churches. John Martin, a forestry professor, was out exploring a forest in Wisconsin one night. He was shining a UV flashlight up into the canopy to spot lichens, fungi, plants, and frogs that glow under the UV light. Then suddenly, he heard a flying squirrel chirping at a bird feeder, pointed the flashlight at it, and saw it light up pink. The professor told his colleagues about it, and they decided to investigate further. They checked out some flying squirrel skins at museums to see if this pink glow is a common thing among them. It turns out that almost all of the flying squirrel specimens they looked at had the same pink fluorescence. Non-flying squirrels didn't glow at all. Other animals with fluorescence, like puffins and chameleons, glow blue under UV light. The only other mammals with fluorescent fur are around 20 species of opossum. They live in different ecosystems and have different diets. The only thing they have in common with flying squirrels is that they're all active at night. And regular squirrels prefer sunlight. There's enough ultraviolet light in low light conditions, and nocturnal animals need UV vision. So the pink glow might have to do with nighttime perception and navigation, especially in cold and snowy conditions. Or it could be a way for male flying squirrels to attract prospective mates. It could be a sort of mimicry.
You have heard about Nikola Tesla. You have definitely heard about the Great Pyramids in Egypt. But what if I told you that Tesla may have probably uncovered the ancient mysteries surrounding the pyramids? Wait, what? Is this a crossover episode? Nope. It's highly probable that the secrets of the pyramids are hidden in plain sight. But first, let's recap what we know about the pyramids. What's so mysterious about them? I mean, they are just old quirky buildings, aren't they? One of the biggest questions is how they were built. Some people think that the pyramids were created by people using only their hands and muscles. But others think that there might have been some kind of crazy energy source that we don't know about yet. Like, what if aliens helped out or something? Just kidding. But this idea of some unknown energy source being used to build the pyramids has been around for ages. Even in old texts, like the pyramid texts, it talks about how the gods gave us something to build a great power. So maybe there was something really powerful and mysterious going on back then? Who knows? Back in the early 1900s, he got obsessed with the Great Pyramids of Egypt. He read numerous books about these ancient structures and was blown away by how much energy they seemed to have. At that time, not many people knew much about electricity, and Tesla started to wonder if there was some kind of advanced tech hidden in the pyramids. He had an idea that the power of the pyramids had to do with electromagnetism, and he put a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out the mystery. Tesla had some pretty unusual theories about the Great Pyramids. He thought that they could actually store and move electricity, which could then be used to power up the areas around them. He also had this theory that the pyramids were built using some kind of crystal energy. He believed that the chambers inside the pyramids could have these super powerful crystals that could control the electromagnetic fields. But that's not all. Tesla also had this idea that the materials used to make the pyramids had properties that allowed them to trap energy from the sun and the moon. And not just a little bit of energy. He thought that the pyramid could actually create this massive energy field that could light up whole cities or even brighten up dark places. He thought that the pyramids could be used as giant power plants to generate electricity and run machines. Tesla even believed that the pyramids were somehow linked to cosmic energy, which could be used for spiritual enlightenment and healing. How very new age of him. Anyway, Tesla wasn't just pulling these ideas out of thin air. He was seriously into studying everything he could about the pyramids, from ancient artifacts and texts to hieroglyphs and drawings. And he came up with this idea that the pyramids were designed to be energy amplifiers, and some kind of unknown energy source was used during their construction. Some people thought Tesla was eccentric for coming up with these theories, but his ideas have actually had a huge impact on the way we think about the pyramids today. Researchers and scholars have been digging into his theories for years and using them to uncover some of the biggest mysteries surrounding these ancient structures. For example, recently scientists have used theoretical physics to investigate how the Great Pyramid of Egypt would react to certain radio waves. They found out that if the radio waves were a certain length, the pyramid could concentrate the energy inside its rooms and focus it under its base. The scientists did lots of calculations to figure this out. They first thought about what radio wavelengths would work best. Then they made a model of how the pyramid would react to the waves. They figured out how much of the energy from the waves would get absorbed or spread out. Lastly, they checked how the energy would move around inside the pyramid when the waves hit it. To help explain all of this, the scientists used something called multipole analysis. This is when you take a complicated object and break it down into simpler parts. Then you can see how each part interacts with the energy that's coming in. It's like taking apart a puzzle to see how each piece fits together. The researchers are interested in how all of this can be used in the future. They want to make really tiny particles that can do the same thing as the pyramid, but with light. By changing the size, shape, and the material of these particles, they can control how the light moves around them. This can be really useful for things like making tiny sensors or super efficient solar cells. The scientists had to make some guesses when they were doing their research. They assumed that there weren't any hidden spaces inside the pyramid, and that the material used to build it was all the same. But even with these guesses, they still made some pretty impressive discoveries. But the pyramid study is not the only proof that Tesla was ahead of his time. There are more Tesla's projects that seemed unrealistic at the time, but that scientists and enthusiasts reevaluate and try to implement today. Let's talk about Tesla's most ambitious project, the Wardencliff Transmission Tower. Back in 1900, Tesla was already a big shot when it came to electrical engineering in America. People were blown away by his amazing inventions and the fact that he managed to outdo Thomas Edison in the battle of currents. However, Tesla wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He decided to embark on his most ambitious project yet, the transmission tower at Wardenclyffe. It was built between 1901 and 1905, and it was based on one of Tesla's breakthrough ideas. He had a vision to make the impossible possible by creating a global wireless communication system. It would use Earth itself as a conductor, transmitting music, news, stock market reports, secured military communications, and even facsimile images. Does it sound familiar? Right, it sounds just like the internet that we use today, only without the use of any wires. But Tesla had a much bigger dream in mind: to transmit power wirelessly. He already proved that high-frequency signals could be sent without any wires using his Tesla coil transformers, and this sparked his obsession with wireless energy transmission. His vision was to not only transform the way we communicate, but also to find a way to transfer power currents globally by tapping into the Earth's natural energy. Tesla believed that there was an abundance of free energy all around us that could be used for humanity's benefit. In 1899, he conducted some top-secret experiments and got convinced that it was possible to transmit electrical power through the Earth's upper atmosphere. This is actually how the Wardenclyffe Tower was created. It was supposed to be the prototype station for a network of towers all over the globe that would provide the whole world with wireless energy. Unfortunately, Tesla didn't have the resources or the patience of his investors to bring this project to fruition. It ran into all sorts of financial problems and roadblocks, and in 1917, the unfinished tower was finally torn down for scrap metal to pay off Tesla's mounting debts. Now it remains a sad reminder that even the greatest minds can sometimes fall short of their dreams. The original red brick laboratory, however, is still there, and it is the only Tesla lab that has survived. Fun fact, in 2017, a film crew made a crazy discovery. They used ground-penetrating radar to explore the area around Wardenclyffe, and they found a whole series of tunnels stretching for hundreds of feet underneath the site. Nobody knows exactly what these tunnels were used for, but people have been speculating for years that they were part of Tesla's grand plan. Wardenclyffe, of course, is a major landmark for Tesla enthusiasts from all over the world. Who knows? Maybe someone will finally crack the mystery of the tunnels one day. But even if they don't, the legacy of Tesla and his amazing ideas lives on.
For more than 3,000 years, the gold mask of Pharaoh Tutankhamun stayed hidden in the Valley of the Kings. This artifact, which stands about 21 inches tall, shows how skilled and artistic the ancient Egyptians were. But nobody expected that X-rays would reveal its biggest secret. King Tut was the last ruler of his family during the 18th dynasty. He took the throne at just 9 years old, but ruled for only 10 years before he passed away unexpectedly. If we're being honest, back in ancient Egypt, he was mostly forgotten by the rulers who came after him. His tomb wasn't a big deal for them, so much so that even the grave robbers forgot about him. It might sound a bit sad, but the truth is that it was actually great news for us. Since his tomb was practically forgotten, it ended up being perfectly preserved. While the other tombs in the Valley of the Kings were looted, his remained sealed and untouched. So when it was discovered back in 1922, it had over 5,000 precious objects inside. That made Tutankhamun basically an instant celebrity and one of the best-known pharaohs nowadays. Among the treasures was the most stunning piece, his golden mask. This mask is said to be an exact image of the king's face, or at least it was supposed to be, but we'll get to that later. The purpose of this accurate representation of his face was to make sure that his soul would recognize him in the afterlife and return to his mummified body. In ancient Egyptian beliefs, this would allow him to continue living in the afterlife. The details of the mask clearly looked incredibly difficult to create, but people didn't realize how complex it truly was until many years later. The first X-rays of the mask were taken in 1967. Back then, the main reason for these scans was practical – conservation. The mask was heading to Paris for an exhibition, and it was the first time it had ever left Paris. This would help them keep track of any changes during the exhibit. Plus, the images could give clues about how the mask was made, but back then, they probably didn't fully realize just how complex its construction was. I mean, Egyptian goldsmiths didn't use modern soldering techniques, so how did they make this mask? New X-rays taken in 2007 gave us some answers. It turned out the Egyptians didn't use pure gold, which is 24 carats. The mask was actually made of 23-karat gold, meaning it was mixed with another material. So specialists discovered that the gold sheets contained a small amount of copper, a reddish-brown metal. This was likely done to make the material more flexible and easier to shape. They would then shape the gold sheets by heating and hammering them over and over again. But there was one more secret inside the mask that wasn't discovered until 2015. The year before, the staff at Cairo's Egyptian Museum were working on the mask display when the long beard of the mask accidentally got knocked off. Another theory is that the beard had become loose over time and just fell off. Either way, the fact that King Tut's beard came off caused a lot of stress. After all, we're talking about one of Cairo's biggest tourist attractions, so the experts had to fix the problem quickly. The restoration process started with a detailed recording of the mask's condition. To do this, they had to take a full three-dimensional scan of the artifact, and, by accident, they found something very interesting in the mask. Inside the royal beard, there is a gold tube, an intriguing structure that the Egyptians likely used to attach the beard to the rest of the mask. And that proved, once again, that the process of making this mask was even more complex than experts thought. But the mysteries don't stop there. Remember how we mentioned that the mask was thought to perfectly represent King Tutankhamun's face? Well, that might not be entirely true. Some popular theories suggest the mask was never meant for him and was actually made for someone else. A study published in 2015 suggested the mask was originally made for a female pharaoh, his supposed stepmother, the famous and beautiful Egyptian queen Nefertiti. The biggest clue comes from an inscription on the mask. At first glance, it seemed to belong to Tutankhamun, but after a close examination, researchers noted that something else was actually written underneath King Tut's name. The royal name stamp seems to have been altered, and originally it had something written on it that translates to Queen Nefertiti. There is another feature of King Tut's golden mask that was overlooked for years, which adds even more mystery. As we mentioned earlier, experts believe he wasn't respected much by the pharaohs who came after him. And one of the clues that made archaeologists think this is the pierced ears on the mask. Some researchers believe that King Tutankhamun wouldn't have worn earrings after he was a kid. So, according to their theory, by the time he passed away at 18, he shouldn't have been represented with pierced ears. This could also support the idea that the mask originally belonged to Nefertiti, or maybe to someone who wasn't even connected to King Tut. But the mask isn't the only source of mystery. In fact, his whole tomb is full of puzzles. Recently, historians found a sign that the place where King Tut was supposed to be buried was changed at the last minute. For years, experts wonder why a pharaoh who ruled for 9 years ended up in such a simple tomb. When compared to the grandeur of other pharaohs' tombs, his tomb seemed, well, a bit plain. The idea that a king like Tutankhamun would have such an unremarkable resting place just doesn't match up with the power and importance he must have had in ancient Egypt. So, what happened? Well, apparently, this might have something to do with his successor, Pharaoh I. After King Tutankhamun passed away, researchers believe that I made sure to erase him from Egypt's history. So, one theory suggests that he was probably behind the quick decision to place King Tut's body in a smaller, less impressive tomb. When experts looked at I's own tomb, they found something interesting. There is a large wall covered in painted baboons. This is the same type of artwork found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It seems like the same person might have chosen the artwork for both tombs. Now, the design and decoration of the two tombs are almost identical, suggesting there was a shared hand behind both. But there is one key difference. I's tomb is fit for a king. It's much bigger and more impressive, even though the style and artwork are similar to what you see in Tutankhamun's tomb. So the theory suggests that I decided what went into both tombs. Since Tut passed away unexpectedly at a young age, his grand tomb wasn't finished in time. Normally, pharaohs start building their tombs while they're still alive to make sure everything is perfect. But Tut passed away when he was just 18, so there wasn't enough time. I may have taken advantage of the situation, ordering a smaller tomb for Tut and keeping a larger one for himself. Experts believe this theory explains why Tutankhamun's tomb is so simple and how I managed to wipe his memory from history so easily. But in the end, the story of King Tut's mask and tomb is full of mystery and intrigue. Each new discovery sheds more light on what really happened all those years ago. But one thing is for sure, the secrets of ancient Egypt still have much to reveal, and King Tutankhamun will continue to fascinate people for years to come.
A girl, once and beautiful, ended up in a grave with a huge sickle across her neck. There were no signs of violence, no indications of any actual crime. Yet, someone was clearly terrified when they forced her into that grave. So scared that they even placed a padlock on the big toe of her left foot. They wanted her to stay in the tomb once and for all, fearing she might rise and take revenge on them. So, a whole community turned against a young lady who wasn't even over 20 years old, deeming her to be of ultimate danger. Do you see what I'm driving at? Let's test your historical knowledge. Who has been feared throughout human history to such an extent that commoners couldn't shake off that lingering sense of dread, even after their passing? If you say witches, warlocks, and vampires, you'd be completely correct. Just a little hint here. If you can't overpower someone physically, you can do it supernaturally. Well, that's at least what people used to think back in the 17th century. Not only was there a sickle and a padlock, but there were also signs of an attempt to twist the girl's corpse in the grave and turn it face down. This attempt had failed, leaving her spine buckled and twisted. By the way, the padlock wasn't necessarily meant to lock a vampire. It was more likely a talisman against evil spirits. That's a peculiar and, let's face it, very cruel way to bury someone. Yet it was a common practice for creating anti-vampire burial sites. The methods for preventing vampires from rising were quite elaborate. First off, let me introduce a term. Anti-vampire graves, known as revenant graves, date back thousands of years and have been found in various locations across Europe. Europe, you heard that right. Now before you say, hey, vampires are a Romanian thing, Dracula, duh, let me convince you otherwise. They are a part of all European folklore, meaning you can find references to them throughout Europe. With new settlements in America, vampire lore spread there too. eventually turning into the Twilight Saga. These anti-vampire burials are characterized by evidence of precautions taken to prevent those who bit the dust from rising. Such measures could include placing large stones on the deceased's legs or even piercing the body with a lance to fix it to the ground. To be completely safe, they could also consider removing the head from the torso. So, burying the body face down, cutting off the head, and pressing the body with a stone were the methods used to keep someone believed to be a demonic being from leaving the grave. Let's return to the poor lady, or rather, the girl. A couple of archaeologists, Dariusz Poliński and his partner, Magna Durodzka, who happened to be partners in both crime and life, stumbled upon her grave. Strangely, all of her 206 bones remained untouched. Yet no gravestone, no name, nothing. Just a lonely grave on a hill in northern Poland. Poliński, a professor of archaeology, and Zagrodzka began piecing together the story of the woman they eventually named Zosia. Carbon dating suggested she had been about 18 years old and had passed away about 350 years ago during a chaotic time in Poland's history. There is little documentation about this graveyard, which seemed to serve as a resting place for individuals marginalized by the community. Was Zosia a poor girl who had been marginalized because life forced her into the worst situation a lady could face? Not really. As the archaeologists delved deeper, they stumbled upon some hints that indicated she might have hailed from a rich family. Her burial featured a stylish bonnet, and the delicate silk along with shiny silver and gold threads found with it suggested that it was part of an elegant headdress. This all pointed to the idea that she had some serious status or wealth. But the way she was buried indicated her outsider status in the village of Pien. Perhaps her presence there was unwanted, hence the idea of her being a vampire, backed up by the manner in which she was forced into the grave and held there. By analyzing the structure of her skull and extricating DNA from her skeleton, scientists created a reconstruction of what her face might have looked like. The specialists meticulously reshaped Zosia's likeness using modeling clay on a 3D printed model of her skull, which proved to be a deeply moving experience. They remarked that while they often worked on face reconstructions, in this case, they also sought to restore her dignity. Utilizing these three methods, the team reconstructed Zosia's 400-year-old face, revealing the human story buried beneath supernatural beliefs. It's ironic, isn't it? First, people tried their hardest to make the world forget her face and prevent her from ever coming back. 400 years later, people did everything they could to bring her back to life. Her picture now is all over the internet, yet we will never see the faces of those who buried her. Alas, this reconstruction project only allows viewers to visually connect with Zosia, but her true story remains a mystery. But what we know for sure is that people who were deemed vampires were badly discriminated against, to say the least. Rumor had it that hungry vampires would even steal people to quench their thirst. Let's use math to prove this rumor wrong and prove that Zosia wasn't one of them. Back in the year 1600, there were only 537 million people worldwide. Yeah, this data may not be very accurate, but it's pretty close to reality. A physicist, Kostas Eftimiou, calculated that if a vampire had been drinking one person's blood each month, humanity would have faced extinction within a few years. Starting with one vampire and a population of 537 million in 1600, this math shows we'd have no humans left by July 1602. But here we are now. Well, while placing a stone on a corpse to make sure the vampire doesn't rise may be something new to you, there are also a bunch of stereotypical things associated with these creatures that you definitely know, such as garlic and mirrors. Funnily enough, even though it's all based on a bunch of superstitions, there's pretty good logic behind the garlic thing. You see, it contains a special compound called allicin, which is a powerful antibiotic. While people back then couldn't know what an antibiotic was, they noticed garlic was pretty effective against various conditions. Since they believed vampires were created by a particular blood condition, they also believed garlic could defeat a vampire. And there's more. There's actually a blood condition called porphyria. which makes people look like real vampires. Their skin is pale and their teeth get bigger as their gums shrink. And guess what? People who have porphyria cannot consume garlic, as it worsens their condition. Wow, that's a cool coincidence. The next superstition is a bit fresher, and it's about vampires avoiding mirrors. The first known reference to the mirrors comes from the book Dracula in 1897. But why wouldn't a vampire show a reflection? Simple. Before the plastic era we live in, mirrors were traditionally backed with silver. Silver was commonly believed to repel evil spirits, possibly because it has antimicrobial properties. Much like garlic, its healing properties may be what was supposed to scare off a vampire. Another reason why suspected vampires may have avoided mirrors is the changes to their appearance from conditions commonly confused with vampirism, like porphyria and rabies. People afflicted with these conditions may have avoided looking in mirrors for that reason, causing others to assume that vampires avoided mirrors. But if you ever met a vampire and these methods don't repel it, I have one more trick for you. Ask the potential vampire to count. It can be spilled grains, seeds, or even the holes in the fishing net if you happen to have one. Vampires are into math, so they'll stop to count, delaying them until sunrise. And we all know that vampires don't do well in sunlight. Ironically, it's Count Von Count, a vampire who teaches us how to count on Sesame Street. You're way more Neanderthal than you think, at least when it comes to your DNA. These ancient hominids were shorter and stockier than humans today. They made stone tools, used fire, wore clothing, and had some rituals of their own. The official theory says that they went extinct 40,000 years ago, but a new study says Neanderthals probably never really disappeared completely, but could have mixed with modern humans. It looks like every modern human has about 3% of the Neanderthal genome in their DNA. If it's accurate, it means Neanderthals were more connected with our ancestors than we previously thought, and shared a long history of living together. Neanderthals were very close relatives of modern humans, but our families separated about 500,000 years ago. More than 10 years ago, scientists discovered that Neanderthals had families with the early humans who traveled out of Africa. Because of this, people living outside of Africa today have about 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA in their genes. We now have only 3 really good examples of complete genetic code from these ancient hominids. The first one comes from bones found in a cave in Croatia that are 50,000 to 65,000 years old. 2 more examples, which are about 80,000 and 50,000 years old, were found in caves in Eurasia. Scientists still aren't sure as much about how modern human DNA got into the Neanderthal genetic alphabet because they don't have enough material to study. But they did compare the existing DNA of 3 Neanderthals with the DNA of 2,000 modern humans. They found that the Neanderthal DNA might be made up to 3.7% of modern human genetic code. It means that in the ancient Neanderthal population, about 1 in 30 parents were modern humans. The scientists found that modern human DNA got mixed into the Neanderthal genetic alphabet during at least 2 periods when humans and Neanderthals were interbreeding. This happened once about 200,000 to 250,000 years ago, and again about 100,000 to 120,000 years ago. There might have been other times they mixed, but we can't see those in the DNA we have now. Another recent study, which hasn't been fully checked by other scientists yet, says that most of the Neanderthal DNA in modern humans came from one big period of mixing, about 47,000 years ago, that lasted for almost 7,000 years. Scientists found skulls that are about 100,000 years old in 2 caves in the Middle East. These skulls look like they belonged to early modern humans, but have some features like bigger eyebrows that might show they had Neanderthal DNA. This could be because of gene flow from Neanderthals, and it fits in the mixing time frame. The study also looked at the genetic differences in the 3 Neanderthal genomes and found out that Neanderthals had an even smaller population than scientists thought before. It could be another proof that Neanderthals didn't just go extinct, but became part of the modern human gene pool. Many groups of modern humans left Africa and mixed with Neanderthals so much that Neanderthals couldn't stay separate. In the future, scientists want to study how modern human DNA affected Neanderthals. This could help us understand if this mixing had good or bad effects on Neanderthals. Neanderthals aren't our only relatives from the past. There used to be at least 9 species of humans on our planet. One of them, Homo habilis, earned the nickname handyman because stone tools were found with its remains. It lived in eastern and southern Africa. This early human had a slightly larger brain than its older relatives and an ape-like face. Homo habilis was about 4 feet tall and ate a variety of foods. For a long time, scientists thought Homo habilis was the oldest member of our human family. But new dating methods have shown that Homo erectus, another ancient human, might be older and not related to Homo habilis. Homo naledi is a more mysterious member of our human family discovered in a South African cave in 2013. It's the only region of the world where their remains were found. They walked on 2 feet but were also good at climbing trees. They were small, about 4 feet 9 inches tall, weighed around 88 pounds, and had small brains. We don't know much about how they lived since we haven't found stone tools or other cultural evidence. But some scientists think they might have buried their deceased and made cave art. In 2010, scientists found some fossils in a cave in Siberia, but they weren't sure what species they belonged to. These fossils are from a group called the Denisovans, who lived between 194,000 and 51,000 years ago. We don't know much about them because we only have a few fossils, but DNA analysis has shown that Denisovans were closely related to Neanderthals and modern humans. They even had families with early humans, especially in Southeast Asia. There aren't enough fossils to give Denisovans their own species name, but their genes are found in modern humans, which means they might be part of our own species. As scientists study more about Denisovans and fossils in Southeast Asia, we might understand better how different species fit into the Homo family tree. In 2003, they found fossils of a very small human-like species in a cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia. These tiny people lived between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago. They were only about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Scientists think they might have come from another species, Homo erectus, and became smaller over time because they lived on an island with limited food. Because of their small size, they're often nicknamed hobbits. Around 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, yep, that's us, were the last humans left out of many different kinds of human-like species that walked on 2 legs. So, the logical question is, what happened to the others? And what did we have to do with their disappearance? Some scientists think we survived because our offspring lived longer, or because we were better at handling changes in the weather. Others think we might have competed with other human species, or maybe mixed with them and shared genes. About 300,000 years ago, the first Homo sapiens lived in Africa. They didn't look exactly like us, but they were more similar to us than other early humans. They had tall, round skulls with almost straight foreheads. Unlike Neanderthals, they didn't have thick brows or jutting jaws like Homo naledi. They also had chins, which no other early humans had, though we still don't know why. Homo sapiens lived in bigger groups and had more genetic diversity compared to other early humans. This helped us in many ways, not just in staying healthy. Having big social networks across different places was like having a safety net. If we ran out of food or water, we could go to other groups we were connected to, and they would help us because we weren't strangers, we were family. These big networks also helped these early humans share new ideas and inventions. A big simulation showed that later species of humans could live in many different environments because of these wide networks and the ability to adapt. We know that Neanderthals were really smart, but Homo sapiens might have been just a little bit smarter. Small inventions like weaving and sewing needles could have given Homo sapiens an edge. Scientists have found evidence of weaving from 35,000 years ago and sewing needles from 30,000 years ago. Weaving lets you make things like baskets and nets to catch food. Sewing needles help you make better clothes and tents, which keep you and your youngsters warm and safe, which is very important for survival.
Hey there, curious history buffs. Have you heard the legend of the ancient race of giants of Nevada? Yes, I'm talking about actual giants that allegedly lived thousands of years ago. Now I know what you're thinking. Giants, really? Well, archaeological finds add fuel to this debate too. And here's where it gets interesting. Longyou Cave was indeed used as a burial site, and some of the remains found there are much larger than average human bones. The cave is by the Humboldt Sink in western Nevada. It was once part of an enormous lake, which eventually dried up, leaving a number of smaller ones, including the Humboldt Sink. The cave became the home of the Site-Ka tribe. According to the legend, these red-haired giants were so big that they had to be buried in the cave itself. Indeed, later on, archaeologists discovered 8 to 10 foot tall skeletons. This legend started to unfold when a mining engineer named John T. Reed talked to the locals in 1886. Once Reed saw the cave, he knew he was onto something. The news spread soon, but the cave was attracting another type of attention too. The deposits of a fertilizer known as guano were discovered inside the cave. So a mining company began excavating the precious resource in 1911 and soon shipped more than 250 tons of the fertilizer to San Francisco. Unfortunately, some of the human remains and artifacts were neglected and lost in the mining process. This led to an official excavation in 1912 and 1924. After the top layer of guano had been mined, strange objects started to surface. Around the area, the earliest evidence of human habitation dates back about 4,000 years. The Lovelock culture lasted for some 3,000 years, and they left us with 10,000 stunning artifacts. The pits in the cave were like a series of time capsules hidden at different depths. Archaeologists determined the age of each pit by its depth. It turns out that many different groups used the cave for storage over a really long time, and the things they stored there give us a really cool glimpse into their cultures. It's like a giant ancient storage unit full of hidden treasures. What have the researchers found besides the giant bones, you might ask? Some other bodies were mummified using a method similar to the one applied by ancient Egyptians. These remains also had something in common with the bodies discovered as far south as Lake Titicaca. Both mummies had some red hair, yet there are scientists who believe this reddish hue is the result of the interaction with the environment in which the bodies stayed. So, while the story of the red-haired giants may be a wild and intriguing tale, not everyone is convinced. Some experts believe that the bones found in Longyou Cave are simply the remains of prehistoric animals, like mammoths or sloths. But others insist that there's something more to the story. Other relics, such as finely crafted baskets and exquisite duck decoys made from tule fibers, were also found there. In any case, this cave is worth the attention it gets. By the way, you can still visit this cave today and see the pits of different depths with your own eyes. But let me tell you one thing, it's in a hot, dry, and isolated place. Archaeologists have made another discovery that seems to be straight out of a legend. They think they found the palace of the one and only Odysseus, who was the legendary Greek king of Ithaca and the hero of Homer's epic poem. Move over, Indiana Jones. We've got some real-life adventure happening here from around 1300 BCE. Apparently, this is the only palace mentioned in Homer's epic poems that hasn't been found. The excavations have been made on the Ionian Islands, and the view from the ruins found on the island of Ithaca are exactly as described in the Odyssey, says the professor who led the excavation team. Known to the ancient Romans as Ulysses, the Greek hero took 10 years to return home to Ithaca after the fall of Troy. For many years, Homer's other epic, called the Iliad, which tells the story of the protracted siege of Troy by the Greeks, was regarded as a myth too. But then, in the 1870s, Troy was rediscovered in modern-day Turkey's Çanakkale city. So, if they found Troy, who's to say they couldn't find Odysseus's home? The researchers were following Homer's words as a roadmap. The excavation site has a building complex with 2 levels. It has important finds, such as storerooms and workshops, a complicated drainage system, and fragments of pottery. It also has a well from the 8th century BCE, which is around the time when Odysseus is believed to have been the king. Yet, not everyone is convinced that the team has actually discovered the home of Odysseus. A British researcher named Robert Biddlestone insists that Homer's description of ancient Ithaca isn't very similar to the island that now has its name, and that Odysseus's kingdom was actually on the Isle of Cephalonia. However, Italian archaeologist Adriano La Regina might have a more realistic approach to this debate. He says that whether this find has a connection to Ulysses or not, what's more important is the discovery of this royal palace. Once upon a time, in a land far away, the Klamath Indians spread a legend about the creation of Crater Lake. Okay, maybe this land is not that far away, and it still exists. You can find it in south central Oregon, in the western United States. Anyway, the legend has it that this lake was formed in a vicious battle between 2 volcanoes, Mount Mazama and Mount Shasta. Then the spirits of Earth and the Sky, which are Lao, who ruled the below world, and Skell, the chief of the above world, joined the fight. It turned into a geological drama. During the battle, darkness veiled the land. The fight was over when Mount Mazama collapsed and sent Lao back into the underworld. Then the rain filled the pit and created a lake in the place where the mountain had once stood. Flash forward to our time. Scientists have discovered that Mount Mazama did erupt 7,700 years ago. Artifacts found in the area prove that the legend indeed contains some details about the explosion. The tale says that red-hot rocks were flying through the sky. This happened during the volcanic eruption that caused the mountain to collapse. This created the volcanic caldera, which later on got filled with water. What makes this legend came true story unusual is how long it has existed. According to researchers, these types of verbal stories lose their credibility within 600 to 700 years. That's why the legend about the creation of Crater Lake is so unique. So many generations, for hundreds of years, have been accurately passing down the information. This volcanic crater lake is now in a national park. It's famous for its deep blue color. The water in it is extremely clear. If you visit it today, the water you'll see won't be the same as for someone who will visit the place 250 years later. Because there are no rivers flowing into or out of the lake, the existing water evaporates and the lake gets filled again by rain and snowfall. Basically, every 250 years, the water is replaced. Plus, this lake is almost 2,000 feet deep, which makes it the deepest lake in the United States. Swimming is okay in the lake, but there's only one legal and safe trail to get to the shore. There are other activities, such as fishing and boat tours. Shared human experiences, such as birth, marriage, and aging, may explain why certain tales are shared globally. Similar struggles and obstacles faced by humans around the world generate similar themes in traditional stories about love, parenting, and mortality. So, do you have legends or tales you've heard of from your grandparents? Who knows? Maybe your ancestors too witnessed a cool historical event.
Have you heard of Gobekli Tepe? It's an ancient site in Turkey that literally made historians rewrite history books. Over 11,000 years ago, a group of prehistoric humans crafted an enigmatic masterpiece that's even older than Stonehenge. Before its discovery, archaeologists believed that people didn't know about iron and weren't good at making pottery. They were sure that settled life only emerged with the need for agriculture. But Gobekli Tepe changed this belief. The place has revealed that it was the temple that paved the way for a settled life, not agriculture. Until this discovery, researchers believed that farming was the catalyst for sedentary living. Meet Professor Schmidt, the guy whose findings changed this theory. He managed to prove that hunter-gatherer communities laid the very foundations of this way of life. Back in the 1960s, other archaeologists visited the area, but they totally missed the mark. While surveying the region, they stumbled upon a hill with scattered limestone slabs and concluded it was just an old burial ground from medieval times. Little did they know that there was so much more to uncover. In 1994, Schmidt embarked on his own survey of prehistoric sites in the area. Surprise! He instantly realized he had discovered something truly extraordinary. Unlike the nearby flat and barren plateaus, Gobekli Tepe had a gently rounded top, rising 50 feet above the surrounding landscape. Funny enough, the translation of this place's name is Potbelly Hill. Schmidt was sure only humans could have made something like this. Those broken limestone pieces that were mistaken for gravestones turned out to be way more exciting. It was like stumbling upon a hidden treasure. The pieces took on a whole new meaning, and Schmidt with his team was about to dive into the secrets waiting beneath the surface. To their surprise, they found no traces of a settlement, no hearths for cooking, no houses, and none of those adorable clay figurines commonly found in nearby sites of similar age. However, they uncovered that those ancient people used tools like stone hammers. So, Schmidt and his team put their heads together and took a wild guess at the age of Gobekli Tepe's stone structures. Their estimation got backed up by some limited carbon dating done right at the site. The ancient vibes of this place were finally starting to make sense. It was like a puzzle slowly coming together. You may think that back then, people didn't have special tools to create something as cool as Gobekli Tepe. Not true. Turns out, these prehistoric folks used flint tools instead of fancy metal chisels. They were also skilled at chipping away softer limestone and crafting pillars right on the spot. Afterward, they carried the pillars a short distance to the summit and placed them upright. Once the stone rings were complete, they covered them with layers of dirt. Over time, they added new rings, and voila! You've got a cool hill to impress people in the future. During their first year of excavation, the team went through 15,000 pieces of animal bones from wild creatures. These people didn't have pet animals or grow their own food. They hunted wild animals for their meals. But things were about to change, because the place had everything they needed to start farming. Scientists say they had wild sheep and wild grains that could be domesticated. And guess what? Just 20 miles away, geneticists found evidence of the world's oldest domesticated strains of wheat at a prehistoric village. These amazing findings have completely changed how we view civilization. In the past, experts believed that people needed to learn how to farm and settle in one place before they could build temples and develop complex societies. But guess what? Schmidt's research flips that idea on its head. He claims that the incredible effort put into constructing these astonishing structures actually set the stage for the development of advanced societies. It means that societal and cultural changes happened before agriculture. Schmidt has this fascinating hypothesis about Gobekli Tepe. He thinks it could have been a special burial site where people left their loved ones. And here's the twist. The burial site was adorned with fancy statues and symbols representing deities from the spiritual realm. The idea that Gobekli Tepe could have served as a sacred place adds another layer of complexity to the whole story. While the site's true purpose may remain elusive, Schmidt's insights invite us to consider the profound interplay between life and the afterlife, and the deep reverence ancient hunter-gatherer societies may have had for their departed ancestors. Now let's talk about the stars of the show, the mesmerizing T-shaped columns that dominate Gobekli Tepe. These mysterious structures range from 10 to 20 feet tall and most likely represent stylized human figures. But one figure stands out from the rest, the three-dimensional lion relief. This depiction really fires up our imagination. Why? Because it hints at the possibility that lions roamed Anatolia during the Neolithic period. These standing stones are arranged in circles and placed in rectangular pits. Each circle has a similar setup. Two big T-shaped pillars in the center, surrounded by slightly smaller ones facing inward. Talk about a stylish arrangement. These towering pillars reach a whopping 16 feet and weigh between 7 and 10 tons. Some pillars are plain and simple, while others are like works of art with intricate carvings. Foxes, scorpions, and vultures come to life, crawling and twisting on the pillars' sides. But it's not just animals depicted on these stones. Some pillars have abstract shapes representing humans, and even small carvings of clothing items. Some of them even have belts. Now, there's one pillar that stands out from the rest like a rock star. This super old stone pillar suggests that a comet crashed into Earth. It happened during a chilly period that lasted about 1,000 years. Previous studies examining Greenland ice cores hinted at this comet theory, but now the carvings at Gobekli Tepe prove it right. The carvings on the pillars are like a historical comic strip. They even show a headless human figure. Researchers fed the images into a computer and discovered their connections to constellations, indicating that this temple might have been an ancient observatory. It's like our ancestors were trying to document this cataclysmic event in their own unique way. Archaeologists have been excavating and researching Gobekli Tepe since the mid-1990s, peeling back layers of history and providing us with a deeper understanding of the intricate relationship between various elements. They have no plans to stop the whole process for another 150 years. Who knows what else they'll find? You see, Gobekli Tepe has been labeled purely as a ritual site with no signs of domestic activities. We were led to believe that the absence of water meant it couldn't support semi-sedentary communities. But scientists believe it's time to shake things up and approach Gobekli Tepe with fresh eyes. It's time to question what we believed before and use new evidence and different ways of thinking. Like, there might have been a group of people living in the area who didn't stay in one place all the time. They moved around a bit but still had their own civilization, living in the area semi-sedentarily. Gobekli Tepe is not just home to a single temple, but an astounding collection of over 20 ancient structures. As archaeologists delve into the depths of this wonder, they are unraveling its unique layout, featuring two prominent focal points at the heart of each establishment, complemented by smaller structures and dividing walls. What's even crazier is that in this area, there are over 200 obelisks, which are narrow tapering monuments.
Hey, how do you feel about taking a trip back in time? We're diving into the history of the Amazon forest to unravel the mystery of its lost cities. Grab your bug spray and hop on. The Amazon forest is the world's largest rainforest. The environment there can be extremely challenging for human life. Yet, the legend goes that the Amazon has been home to sprawling settlements, rich in unmeasurable wealth. Could that really be true? Or is that none other than a figment of our collective imagination? The legend of El Dorado might be the myth that started this whole thing. As European explorers began their excavations in American lands back in the 1500s, word got out of an Amazonian civilization that used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, aka the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. Explorers got excited at the possibility of finding an infinite amount of gold somewhere deep within the Latin American jungle. And as you can imagine, expeditions to the continent began to multiply with each passing year. It didn't take long before explorers found this civilization. They were known as the Muisca people and were located in Colombia, near Lake Gudavia. The Muisca people had a tradition of painting their leader, aka the Zipa, from head to toe in gold. In a ceremonial gesture, the Zipa would swim into the river, spreading gold dust all over the lake. For the Muisca, this was their way of acknowledging and thanking the higher powers of the universe they believed in. When European explorers heard and witnessed this practice, they were amazed. For them, gold was used solely for commercial purposes as their main currency for trade. This made them think that the Muisca people must have stacks and stacks of gold hidden somewhere in the jungle for them to use it so abundantly. Well, that's how the legend of El Dorado was born. What was once the practice of El Hombre Dorado traveled on word of mouth until it became El Dorado, a fictional city that was most likely to hide piles of gold. The hunt for this city led Europeans to spend large amounts of money to scour the Amazon forest. Unfortunately, all of their expeditions came back empty-handed. That is, if they ever came back at all. Now, jump to the beginning of the 1900s. In England, the Royal Geographic Society, a prestigious British institution, was looking for somebody willing to travel down to Latin America to trace the border between Brazil and Bolivia. More specifically, the part of the border that is nestled deep within the Amazon rainforest. One Sir Percy Fawcett was a Latin American aficionado, and he gladly volunteered to do the job. Oh, it's important to note that the Amazon forest is virtually the size of the continental USA. It sprawls across 8 countries, including Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. And trust me, getting around is no easy feat. The jungle is covered in dense vegetation, and in addition to that, it's home to insane predators such as anaconda snakes, panthers, crocodiles, piranhas, and so on. But despite all that, Fawcett was very successful in his mapping adventure and seemed to be wanting to come back more. Back in England, Fawcett would scour diaries from other explorers hoping to learn more about the ancient Amazonian civilizations. He would read about the Incas and the Mayans and the great empires they built. He believed that if the Incas were capable of building empires that stretched over 2 million square miles, this could mean that other Amazonian civilizations could have thrived there too. During his research, Fawcett came across a report from a 16th century explorer. The report told of a city deep within the Amazon forest that held unimaginable quantities of minerals, a town that stretched for 15 miles without any space from a house to house. This report fueled Fawcett's imagination to a new extreme. From then on, he became obsessed with finding what he called the lost city of Z. Over years, Fawcett searched the Amazon forest, usually looking for stone ruins that could possibly indicate human settlements. On his later expeditions, he focused on exploring the state of Mato Grosso in central Brazil. He would travel from Europe and into the lower region of the Xingu River. The trip to the Xingu would take him around 14 days on foot. Then, he would set sail in small wooden boats accompanied by local indigenous leaders that knew the region better than anyone. How he communicated with the indigenous population is still a mystery, since they only spoke in local dialects. Some scientists believe that this could have been the real reason why he never found the city. They believed he wasn't able to communicate what exactly he was looking for. And this was not his greatest difficulty. As we've said before, Amazon is not a kind place for its visitors. In his diaries, Fawcett tells of encounters with a 60-foot-long anaconda, which he bravely survived. He writes of endless sleepless nights and waking up with his hands and feet swollen from mosquito bites. Some of his peers said he was invincible and tireless, but the day came during his 8th expedition when he didn't make it back home. Fawcett disappeared without leaving any trace behind. Some even suspect that he was close to reaching his lifelong goal. On the day of his disappearance, he sent an optimistic letter to his wife saying there was nothing to fear, and that he was setting out on a certain final search. Fawcett's failed attempt to find ruins seemed to support what had become a consensus among experts at the time, that this rainforest was too inhospitable to support large, complex societies, let alone cities. Experts were convinced that the Amazon's lost cities were nothing more than fiction. That is, until the 1960s, when modern research began to find evidence that suggested otherwise. Scientists discovered patches of extremely fertile soil. They called it Black Earth. And apparently, they found lots of it in the Amazon, especially alongside rivers. Further research even showed that such soil was created by human waste or the intentional burning of forests, which adds nutrients to the soil below, which could only mean bingo! The discovery of Black Earth was the evidence that large-scale agriculture was possible and probably did exist amidst the Amazon, confirming that settlements could have formed there after all. In the 1990s, along the Xingu River in Brazil, a team of archaeologists from the University of Florida made a remarkable discovery. Working alongside local indigenous people, they found very long ditches. After mapping them, they realized that these ditches were a sign of a big settlement. They were remnants of carefully designed walls centered around a plaza. Some were roads that led to more settlements. In fact, just this part of the Amazon, about the size of New Jersey, was once a network of dozens of settlements that experts believe could have been home to at least 50,000 people between 1250 and 1650 CE. Other discoveries were possible thanks to LiDAR imaging, a type of technology that allows researchers to take satellite pictures of the forest's ground without having to step inside of it. A network of trenches in Acre, Brazil, dates back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported 60,000 people. Other images from near the Xingu River suggest cities that could have housed about 50 million people. These were the lost cities of the Amazon. Believe it or not, these images suggest that Fawcett was very close to a major discovery. He was looking for the ruins in the right place, but he was looking for the wrong thing. Unlike cities such as Cusco, which used stone as their primary material, Amazonian settlements used wood and earth to build their cities. These materials are highly deteriorating and probably decomposed over time. Finding them required a bit more technology than what Fawcett had available at his time.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boskop Man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a Boskop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the Boskops spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that Boskops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Play-Doh, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on trade goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
A comfortable abode with a gorgeous view of the Mediterranean Sea will serve as a perfect rain shelter. Well, this is what a real estate advertisement might have looked like for Neanderthals 100,000 years ago. Welcome to the weird and wonderful caves you could live in, or not. Of course, back then, neither real estate and advertising had been invented yet. Never mind the fact that Neanderthals couldn't build houses and often lived in caves. Yet, one of those caves looks an awful lot like a residential building. It's situated inside a high limestone cape called the Rock of Gibraltar. If the Neanderthals had had an economy, the caves inside this rock would have cost a bundle. Navigators discovered it in 1907. They just spotted a big hole inside the fortified rock. For many years, scientists have studied this place and found some traces of Neanderthals. They discovered ancient tools in the cave and bones of old animals. But the coolest thing was, they found 4 caves inside the rock. It was like a residential complex. Neanderthals lived alongside neighbors and helped each other hunt and fish. They created feather decorations and painted abstract drawings on the walls. Imagine our ancient predecessors hanging out in these caves 100,000 years ago. And now, scientists hang out there and study the primeval past of Neanderthals in detail. At the end of 2021, archaeologists uncovered a gap inside one of the caves leading to an unknown tunnel. They crawled through this hole and opened a new space under the cave roof. This place has been closed off from the outside world for over 40,000 years. And it seems it was one of the most prestigious apartments in the entire mountain complex. It has high ceilings with ancient stalactites. The ruined stone curtains divided the apartment into several rooms. Scientists also found the remains of ancient animals and scratches on the walls. It seems that Neanderthals had never lived here, but they used to visit this place. Archaeologists found the shell of a sea snail called dog whelk. One of the Neanderthals brought it here for some reason, but the primary owners of this place were hyenas. These caves show that Neanderthals were closer to humans than to monkeys. They had a way of life and even some customs. There's still a lot of work ahead, and scientists hope to find new rooms inside this rock. Meanwhile, in 2003, archaeologists discovered another early dwelling on the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. Among the green jungle, they found a cave with ancient tools. At first, everyone thought the human ancestors lived here, but then scientists discovered an unusual skeleton of an adult. A thorough analysis showed the skeleton belonged to a 30-year-old woman, 3.5 feet tall, just above the waist of an average adult. The woman's weight was equal to the weight of an adult shepherd. The skeleton didn't belong to Neanderthals or Australopithecines. It was a new unknown species, which scientists called Homo floresiensis, or simply the Hobbit. Also, there were remains of unusual ancient animals in the cave. It was an elephant the size of a cow, some large storks, and giant rats. Archaeologists have found out that hobbits were not the owners of this place. The main inhabitants were the rats the size of a cat. Maybe they were fighting the hobbits. Some analysis shows that Homo floresiensis wasn't our direct ancestor. They were in a separate branch of evolution. The hobbit skeleton looks more like that of a monkey than of modern humans. In 2009, in the dense jungle of Vietnam, archaeologists discovered Son Don, the largest cave in the world. If you go inside the cave and shout, you'll hear your echo a long time. In some places, the height of this cave reaches half the height of the Empire State Building, and the total area is larger than one central block of New York. Son Don is one of the 3 caves in the Vietnamese jungle. Many intricate mazes connect these caves. Inside, you can find unique plants and trees that live separately from the outside world. It's a real underground jungle. In some places, you can find collapsed ceilings that let the sunlight in. Besides unusual trees and plants, ancient stalactites hang there. Some limestone deposits are more than 450 million years old. They were here even before dinosaurs appeared. There are also many rivers in the cave. Rainwater coming down from holes in the ceiling has formed them. Fast streams resemble slides in a water park. They lead to unknown underground labyrinths. Scientists have studied only a small part of all these caves. The next unusual cave is in New Zealand. Hundreds of thousands of fireflies live inside. Each of them glows with a blue light. Together, they light up the cave. It may seem to you that you're on another planet, but you can't stay there for a long time. Special air measuring devices are everywhere. Scientists monitor the level of carbon dioxide necessary for the normal existence of fireflies. These insects are sensitive to the environment. If there are many people in the cave, or they stay there too long, the park staff will ask them to leave the place. It's like you're literally stealing oxygen from the fireflies. We've seen some pretty amazing caves so far, but how about a scary one? We're going to the desert of Yemen's Al-Mara province. What we're looking for is not a cave, it's just a black hole in the ground, right in the middle of the desert. It's big, the size of a basketball court. It's not its size that could scare you, but what's inside. Scientists are still not sure what it is. From the depths of this black abyss, a disgusting smell of rotten eggs constantly comes out, and sometimes you can hear some strange, frightening sounds. The blackness of the giant hole in Yemen absorbs all the sun's rays, so you won't see what's there even with a powerful flashlight. People flew over this place by helicopter. They filmed using drones and the most powerful lenses, but they didn't catch anything except darkness. It looks like a big ink spot in the middle of golden sand. The locals are afraid to approach this place. They believe the cave leads to another dimension where evil creatures live. At the moment, the giant hole in Yemen is one of the most poorly studied and mysterious phenomenon of nature. How did it appear? How old is it? Where does it lead? Scientists are trying to find the answers to these questions. There are theories that the hole appeared because of construction work. Geologists drilled the soil nearby in search of minerals. It could have caused fluctuations in the Earth's crust and collapsed the surface. But no one can prove this theory, yet. And now, imagine a place where sunlight has not penetrated for more than 5 million years. There's little oxygen, and it's cold and damp. Still, life is born in this place, not only microbes and bacteria, but also something bigger. The living conditions in this cave are very different from the usual ones, so, in a sense, this cave is like another planet. It's the Movile Cave in the southeast of Romania, near the Black Sea. The entrance is a small hole in the ground. Inside, a tunnel leads deep below the surface. The levels of hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide are above normal inside the cave. The air here is half as much oxygen as on the surface. People can't be here without an oxygen mask, but other creatures living here can. The cave is home to 48 species of living organisms. 33 of them are unknown. Here you can meet some unusual insects, white snails and white spiders, millipedes with huge whiskers, transparent shrimp, and unique species of leeches. They all live here thanks to the little bacteria autotrophs. They absorb carbon dioxide and release food particles. Bacteria feed on it. Other larger organisms feed on these bacteria, and some bigger organisms eat those little ones. In the end, everyone gets food. In this cave, evolution has created a biological system separate from the rest of the world.